I'll do a very brief introduction for the benefit of the witnesses who have joined us today. My name's Lorna McCallum. I'm a reporter with the Department of Planning and Environmental Appeals, and my colleague Dan Jackman is an assistant chief reporter. We're here to look into the objections to the flood protection order proposed by Dumfries and Galloway Council. And today we are continuing on the topic of visual and heritage, which we commenced on yesterday, with witnesses yesterday from Mr Dowson and Mr Waterhouse. Could I just check that everyone has their phones either off or on silent, please? Again, we've no fire drills proposed today. Nearest fire exit is through the main doors and out the front door. Toilets are down the corridor to your right. And the webcasting will be back to normal, we hope, today. So if you could use your microphones, I'm not sure if the new witnesses today have been shown how to use them, but basically it's a large button at the bottom when you wish to speak, and press it again when you've finished.
They have been warned about the perils of not remembering to switch them off, of which a number of us, particularly me, have been guilty.
Thank you, much appreciated. Okay. Can I just raise the point of the matters from yesterday, the tables 4.1 and 4.2? Have we made any progress with those being provided, Mr Cullen?
I'm not in a position to provide them as of this moment. They have been prepared, they're being checked, and I would anticipate them being circulated very shortly. I haven't come with a precise deadline for that, but I'm anticipating if it's not today, it may be tomorrow, something in that order, if that's in order.
Okay, thanks very much. Once we've had those, we'll make them available to yourself, Mr Dowson, and then we can have a discussion at some point, either today or early next week.
There are two other documents that, in a sense, are also in that box. The email from Scottish Water with the costings, that's being obtained also, and I would hope that could also be made available around the same time scale. I haven't actually seen it in that clean form myself yet, but it should be there. And likewise, the material on the town centre forum might conveniently be produced at around the same time. That is available. So again, hopefully in the pause when some of us are not locked in here, we can just make sure that all of that is done.
Thanks, that's very much appreciated. Okay, does anyone have any other procedural matters this morning? Okay, can we move on to your first witness, Mr Connell?
Thank you, ma'am. My first witness is Catherine Kidd. Good morning. You have a summary precognition. I think you have that available to you. In that summary precognition, you set out your position and your qualifications, and in particular your role in relation to the heritage impact assessment, which we find tucked away inconveniently unindexed at the back of the environmental assessment, but that's where it is. I think I also see in the introduction you make the point that in doing your work, you work closely with, in particular, Graham Pert, who was involved in a lot of the design elements of the scheme. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Perhaps the logical starting place, therefore, to avoid simply reading through your qualifications might be at paragraph 1.3, if you would just start reading there, please.
The precognition to which this summary relates should be read in conjunction with the Council's inquiry statement addressing visual and heritage impacts and the evidence presented by Graham Pert and Susan Irwin. The precognition to which the summary relates was prepared to specifically respond to heritage matters raised in the inquiry statement and subject to further procedure during the public local inquiry. These matters are addressed in Section 2 of the precognition as follows. 1. Impacts on listed buildings, which refer to Section 2, paragraphs 2.1 and 2.11. 2. Impacts on Dervagilla Bridge, refer to Section 2, paragraphs 2.2 to 2.24. And 3. Conservation area impact, refer to Section 2, paragraphs 2.25 to 2.28. The most substantive heritage matter arising is the impact on Dervagilla Bridge, and this is the focus of this summary statement. Reference should be made to my precognition on the other matters listed above and my concluding statement in relation to these matters.
And then you give some background in the next section.
Yes. Would you like me to continue with that? Background and context, nature of involvement. The HIA Heritage Impact Assessment was prepared as a separate report that would be incorporated as a technical appendix to the Strategic Environmental Assessment Environmental Report, and could also be a standalone report to support the application for scheduled monument consent in connection with Dervagilla Bridge. The scope of the heritage assessment, therefore, included a wide assessment of the potential impacts on the scheme, including designated assets such as scheduled monuments, listed buildings, conservation areas, and non-designated assets such as known archaeology.
Could you just continue, please?
Timeframe and consultation. The HIA was prepared as part of a responsive design process in consultation between myself and Graham Pert at Gillespie, so that avoidable impacts, in particular to Dervagilla Bridge, could be mitigated through design and so that I could be kept abreast of design changes in response to engineering or other technical matters. The HIA was developed in consultation with Susan Irwin, previously as Gillespie's and now self-employed as Susan Irwin Landscape Architect, with regards to townscape and visual impact, TVIA, due to the overlap between townscape and visual impacts and those impacts relating to the setting of heritage assets and the conservation area issues. The HIA was developed through consultation with the archaeology officer at Dumfries and Galloway Council, with a particular focus on Dervagilla Bridge. An initial draft of the HIA was prepared in June 2016 based on an assessment of a flood protection scheme approved by Dumfries and Galloway in November 2015. This scheme, however, was modified in August 2016 to take into account revised flood inundation heights modelled from a significant flood event that had occurred in December 2015. The height predicted enabled a reduction in the overall flood defence height and some modification to the design scheme. Most significantly, they include a reduction in the need for a physical intervention to Dervagilla Bridge and an improved design solution in this location. These changes also affected the visual impact of the scheme on the setting of listed buildings and the character and appearance of the conservation area. The HIA was redrafted in September 2016 to take into account these design changes, and this draft was circulated to Historic Environment Scotland and Dumfries and Galloway Council. A final draft was prepared and issued in January 2017, incorporating the response to the draft HIA from Historic Environment Scotland and following further assessment based on the fly-through visualisation of the scheme.
Thank you. So you now turn on to purpose and methodology.
The purpose and methodology for the HIA is provided in the precognition, Section 1, paragraphs 1.22 to 1.25. The purpose of the HIA was to evaluate the effects of the proposed scheme on heritage assets. Chapter 2 of the HIA includes a descriptive gazetteer of the assets, their historic development, a description of the setting, and assessment of significance. In relation to the conservation area, a description of its character and appearance is provided. Chapter 3 of the HIA sets out the statutory and planning policy context for the heritage assets, including material considerations that were taken into account when determining the scheme, and determining application of scheduled monument consent in relation to Dervagilla Bridge. The evaluation methodology for assessing the impacts of the scheme on the assets is set out in Chapter 4 of the HIA, and this is followed by the evaluation for each asset. Each evaluation includes descriptive assessment of the impact on the asset, proposed mitigation, whether this is by design or during construction, and the evaluation findings to determine the significance of the effect.
Thank you. And then in the next section, to some extent, what you're doing is responding to issues that have cropped up during the process. Is that correct?
That's correct. As mentioned above, the focus to response to heritage matters raised. As mentioned above, the focus of this precognition summary statement is the impact of the flood protection scheme on Devon-Giller Bridge. This is set out in section 2, paragraphs 2.12 to 2.24 of my precognition. Other heritage matters raised are also considered in section 2. Impact on Devon-Giller Bridge. Devon-Giller Bridge has a dual designation as a scheduled monument and a category A listed building. Where a building or monument is designated as both a scheduled monument and listed building, the statutory framework for scheduled monuments applies. Therefore, the impact on Devon-Giller Bridge was considered in the HIA with regards to the impact on the scheduled monument and its setting above its designation as a listed building. Works affecting scheduled monuments require a special kind of consent, known as scheduled monument consent. This is a separate consenting process that would be determined by Historic Environment Scotland out with the flood protection order. Given the requirement to develop proposals that ultimately will need to be sufficiently detailed to secure scheduled monument consent, the proposals for the works to Devon-Giller Bridge were developed in more detail. These proposals are presented in the Devon-Giller Bridge Proposals Report prepared by Gillespie LLP, September 2016, which is document B822. The HIA provides a detailed descriptive gazetteer of Devon-Giller Bridge, and its setting is illustrated by photographs. This includes an analysis of its historic development and changes to its setting, its fabric and materials. The gazetteer established that the bridge dates to the early 17th century, but the steps at the east end of the bridge that would be directly affected by the works date to the early 19th century, at a time when the extent of the bridge on its east side was truncated following the removal of its outer 3 arches and relating to construction works associated with the winding of New Bridge Street. The HIA evaluation provides detailed descriptions of the proposed works that may affect the fabric of the bridge and its setting, and then considers in turn the potential impact of these works. In summary, these changes and the implications to the bridge structure or its setting include formation of the new bridge access. This would create a fully accessible route onto the bridge with a new approach following the alignment of the former eastern extent of the bridge. The eastern steps were buried but preserved in situ, changing the character and appearance of the bridge that has been present since the early 19th century. The earliest phases of the bridge fabric and the most culturally significant aspects of the bridge, dated from the 17th century, will not be affected. The former eastern extent of the bridge will be interpreted within the new access approach. Flood defence wall construction. The foundations will not affect archaeological remains associated with the historic bridge structure. New walls will radiate from the barrel posts adjoining these, but leaving these and the historic river wall exposed and legible. Excavation for building services. Excavation of new gas and water trenches could have impact on archaeological remains associated with the demolished eastern arches of the bridge. Removal of vegetation and sedimentation along the riverbank. Removal of sedimentation will significantly improve the character and appearance of the bridge, revealing the arches and improving the river setting. Changes to the setting of the bridge. The formation of the bridge access and the flood defence wall will have the greatest impact on the setting of the bridge, changing the character and appearance that existed since the early 19th century. The removal of several modern features, such as extensive car parking and the modern WC block, and replacement with the associated public realm improvements, will improve the wider setting of the bridge and the public appreciation of the heritage asset. The historic alignment of the bridge through the lane to the east will be enhanced by the proposals. Design development and embedded mitigation. Design changes to the access approach at the east end of the bridge were incorporated during the assessment process. This included alterations to where the new proposals meet or relate to the bridge with a view to developing a scheme with a minimal impact on the existing historic fabric and archaeological remains. The design proposals at the time of the final HIA had been developed following a series of design options and to be as sensitive to the historic bridge fabric and its setting whilst providing the flood protection required and a fully accessible bridge. An options appraisal is presented in the Devon-Giller Bridge Proposal Report, Gillespie's 17/2016. The design of the stepped approach to the bridge has been developed so it enhances the public realm and interprets the alignment of the former eastern extent of the bridge and the position of the former bridge piers. The materials used for the road, footway, step and wall surfaces have been selected to respect the historic materials of the bridge, whilst also being distinct from the historic fabric in accordance with conservation principles. Development works involving the burial of the existing steps at the eastern ends of the bridge to protect and retain these in situ have also been developed. These works follow the conservation principles of reversibility. Proposed mitigation to further reduce the impact of the works on the Devon-Giller Bridge. Further mitigation measures would also be incorporated at the appropriate stages in the detailed design and construction of the scheme. These include an archaeological evaluation and watching brief and a historic building record of the bridge. Summary of assessment of effect on Devergiller Bridge. The HIA concluded that the overall significance of the effect of the proposed development on Devergiller Bridge is slight, and whilst this has an adverse effect, it will not be significant. The potential for a significant effect has been mitigated through the embedded design mitigation and future mitigation during or pre-construction. This conclusion is supported in Historic Environment Scotland's response to the draft HIA dated 9th of December 2016, document reference VH5.
Thank you, Mr. Codden.
Just, first of all, just one point in case it gets lost in the reading. You've mentioned a couple of times interpreting the alignment of the former eastern extent of the bridge. Could you just tell us what you mean by that?
So the bridge has been truncated in the early 19th century. It has 3 bridge piers that are evidence that sort of below ground archaeological remains are along the eastern extent, and they continue through kind of a lane through across New Bridge Street and across the eastern extent. So there's 5. And the design of the new steps as part of the flood protection scheme follow that alignment. So it kind of continues that alignment, so it follows through kind of visually and physically.
Thank you. Can I just ask then a general question that follows on from your recognition? You touched on in more fuller detail in your full recognition and briefly in your summary the works that are being proposed. Do you think you're destroying the bridge by supporting these works?
No.
And just one point really, which is just almost for information. It cropped up in a very early stage of this inquiry. You've mentioned the positive impact of the removal of the toilet block and associated vegetation. Will that require separate consent because it's in a conservation area?
The removal of the toilet block would, as an unlisted building in the conservation area, would require conservation area consent.
Thank you. Nothing further, ma'am.
Mr. Dyson.
Morning. Hello there. You're based in Edinburgh, is that correct? You work from Edinburgh?
That is correct.
Yeah. In preparing all your reports, could you tell me what efforts did you make to sort of meaningfully engage with local people, particularly local people perhaps with historic or heritage knowledge?
I didn't consult personally with local people, but I did visit the local archives, the museum, had a good site visit to be able to form an opinion on the impacts of the proposal on the heritage assets.
Yeah. Okay. I'm referring to your full precognition. I know there's different paragraph numbers, so it might be helpful. In paragraph 1.14, which is about timeframe and consultation, you talk about a phrase called mitigation through design. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Well, there are different ways to mitigate impacts. So we, through consultation and discussion with the designers, you can reduce and avoid impacts on bridges by making design changes. So, for example, we discussed the preservation in situ of the steps at the east end and how they could be protected through incorporating construction measures that would enable them to be protected, so including a membrane, so that there's a separation between new layers and things like that, and looking at methods in where you make fixings and where masonry is abutting the existing bridge and new and the old. So those are kind of design measures that have been incorporated into the proposals to mitigate impacts on the fabric of the bridge.
No, it's just the use of the word mitigation, which was interesting, because my understanding is that is mitigation is about making something bad better, so that you're actually starting or accepting that there's something fairly like an impact might be a negative thing, and you're trying to make it better. Is that a reasonable definition of mitigation in design?
I mean, it's improving. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's improving and doing the best that you can to minimise impacts through design, and that's a normal process in designing works involved in heritage or existing structures and building conservation.
I suppose I'm trying to say that the implication is that impacts on structures, historic structures, in my opinion, tend to be negative things that you're trying to basically mitigate, to minimise the impacts as much as possible. Would that be fair?
Impacts can be beneficial as well, and adverse. And what you're trying to make the best that you can through through change, and it's about managing change on existing buildings and structures, and making the best of that.
In paragraph 1.17, you mentioned, I think, the events of, was it 2015, which included sorry, I've got the wrong thing here. Oh no, sorry, it is about December 2015. The height predicted enabled a reduction in the overall flood defence height. This was the recalibration, I think. Could you tell us a little bit about that, the amount of that reduction, and how did that reduction really assist your design?
That's a very technical question that I'm not qualified to deal with in terms of flood heights. But what it does mean in terms of the changes to design that meant, particularly if we're talking about impacts and interventions to Devonshire Bridge, it did mean that there was no longer a requirement to. Previously, the previous design included the raising of parapets on the bridge, so that enabled us to do a much more sensitive design response at Devonshire Bridge, and actually minimise the amount of work that would be required to the bridge.
That's helpful, but does that mean in future, if the barrier needed to be raised, say for any reason, that design problem would then come back? For instance, if the barrier needed to be raised for climate change in the future or for any other reason, that design problem would then return, would it not?
Again, I'm not qualified to answer that, because that's to do with flood protection heights, and that's quite a technical matter. I believe the defence height proposed is sufficient to deal with the 1 in 200 scheme. So flood occurrence. I would not be able to qualify to advise on the impacts and implications of the design, because it would be a completely new flood protection scheme. So we're looking at something different.
Right. I'll leave that question there. But would you agree that there has been an attempt to keep the barrier down as low as possible, because of this junction, certainly, or that certainly seems to be a design problem. If the barrier was higher, if you had not been able to reduce that height, it would have created a problem at that point, wouldn't it?
As I said, the previous flood protection scheme did involve more works, not substantially greater works, but involved more works to the bridge. But in recalibrating the flood heights, it enabled a less works required to the bridge. So I'm not entirely sure what your question was, so could you just repeat it? Sorry.
Well, I think I've probably got my answer. I don't want to labour it, but it really was just the fact that the higher the defence becomes, the more of a design problem is created, particularly at the Deverbrilla Bridge as it comes in there.
But the design response has been to provide a defensive line that meets the requirements, that suits the bridge as well. So, yeah.
Could I go to paragraph 1.23, which is about the process for identifying heritage assets, and you have a number of bullet points there. Just very briefly, I'm not looking for a massive list, but could you just tell us what you consider to be the major heritage assets? I mean, obviously there's the bridge and the Grade A listed property, but there was a few others. Could you just very briefly, Mary, perhaps, or is that okay?
Yes, I could list them if that would be helpful. So I believe they are listed at the front of my recognition, actually just grouping them rather than individually listed. I have seen, yes, if you turn to page 2.1. So on listed buildings, there are a number of listed buildings, both within the scheme itself. They're the bridges. They're all listed. So they're the 4 bridges and the core sort of going across the river. So they're the listed buildings within the kind of scheme area. And then just out with the scheme area, so associated Whitesands, a number of properties, listed buildings, including the category listed 29 Irish Street and 92 Whitesands, which fronts onto the river the other side of Whitesands Road, and then a number of category B and C listed buildings kind of along Newbridge Street, Whitesands, and fronting the river. In other response to other heritage assets, obviously the scheduled monument, which is Deverbrilla Bridge, and the conservation area, Dunphy's conservation area.
Okay, that's kind of what I was trying to come to, your last comment about the conservation area itself. Do you consider that to be a heritage asset?
Yes, absolutely. It's a designated heritage asset.
And I mean, a conservation area is not like a building, a listed building, or a Deverbrilla Bridge. It's an area. Would you accept that within that area, sort of cultural traditions are assets in a sense, that that the actual purpose and function of these areas is part of the community's heritage?
Yes, but it's not necessarily part of what you might call a conservation area. The activities and land uses of a conservation area can help form and shape the townscape character, if you like, of a conservation area.
So I'm thinking particularly of the Whitesands itself and the sort of cultural and even commercial activities that have happened on the Whitesands over centuries, in fact. I describe it as a kind of transport hub or transport heart of the town. Have you any thoughts on the cultural and commercial uses of the space in terms of their value in terms of heritage?
So the Whitesands does have a role to play in the historic and architectural character and appearance of a conservation area in terms of the fact its relationship to the river. In terms of the conservation area designation, the more recent commercial activity wouldn't be part of that historic and architectural character for this particular conservation area. But the activities, the formation, the Whitesands was formed as an area for docking and trading and delivery of goods from the river. So it has historic connections and character in terms of that, and then later, sort of cattle market and things, and that kind of thing. So that does contribute to that character part, to that part of that area, yes.
I mean, the point I'm trying to get at is that over centuries that space has been used just for the purposes you've said, and it's been a place where by various means of transport people have landed there. And in early times it would be by river, in Victorian times by horse and cart perhaps, and nowadays it tends to be by car, truck or bus. Part of our view is that is continuing that historic and heritage tradition. Do you agree with that, with what I've just said?
I would, the historic character and architecture is not of the conservation area is not related to it being a transport hub. That is not the basis on which the area is designated, or as a car park. I would not say that it would be a consideration in terms of designating that area as a conservation area. So no, I won't agree with that comment.
Comment. Okay, well, we maybe have to agree to disagree on that, but would you not accept, though, that the current scheme being proposed is effectively a significant change of use from the historical uses that have been on the Whitesands?
No, because the proposals involve creating a public realm and square and the reuse of the Whitesands as an open space, so in which it historically always been.
In paragraph 210, you refer to the public realm improvements proposed. You're saying that the overall significance of effects on the setting of all other listed buildings will be neutral, and in some cases improved due to the public realm improvements proposed. What are the public realm improvements that are being proposed?
Largely the removal of elements that are detrimental to the setting of listed buildings and the character and appearance of the conservation area, including car parking within the Whitesands, and the removal of or improvements to the bus terminus that affect the setting of number of listed buildings, and the removal of items such as structures such as the toilet block, which affects views. So all these are kind of improvements to the public realm that will improve the kind of the appearance of the area.
Right. That's very much about removing things, but we're talking about, are the public realm improvements then only things that you're removing?
Public realm improvements are a combination of things. So improvements to the open space is the Whitesands, and actually creating it as an improved area that for activity and public activity, and improved landscape proposals, improving people's access to the river through the walkway that is proposed. So there are a number of interrelated components, public realm components, that actually improve the appearance of the Whitesands and the setting of the river.
In paragraph 214, you referred to the bridge as early 17th century. We kind of thought it was a bit earlier than that. Paragraph 2.14.
The main masonry construction of the bridge dates to kind of the early 17th century. That is correct. I mean, there has been a crossing over the bridge, over the river, at that point since 14th or 15th century. But the masonry bridge that you see today dates from that time. Yeah,
I think it was washed out in 1620 or something. And
yes.
Presumably that's it. Okay, fair enough. Yep. Mm-hmm. Paragraph 2.15 then, in terms of the new bridge access, you mentioned that the eastern steps will be buried but preserved in situ, changing the character and appearance of the bridge that has been present since the 19th century. Now, obviously, we are very concerned about that. We're very unhappy about that. You clearly feel that that's important enough to preserve in situ. It must be fairly important if you want to do that.
The intention is to minimise any works that affect the bridge by preserving in situ. That is what we are doing.
But if it's important enough to preserve in situ, I'm just wondering, you must give a value to it then in historic terms. It seems a pity to take that important feature and cover it up.
I'm not sure I'm clear
question?
about that question. Yeah. Could you maybe rephrase that for us, Mr. Tyson?
Okay, I'll in preserving something in situ, that seems to give a value to it in historic terms, that you don't want to interfere with it. You're accepting that it needs to be preserved for the future. But in the same process, we're covering it up for 100 years. Do you not see a kind of inconsistency there of logic? For I do, but maybe I haven't phrased that very well.
No, I don't see that as an inconsistency in logic. With kind of archaeological remains and monuments, these are not the most significant part of the end of the bridge. So it's a later part of the bridge that as a result of it actually being partially destroyed in the early 19th century, to when the new bridge was created. So in terms of significance, if for want of a better word, this is not the most significant part of the bridge. So it's a method, should someone in the future wish to find out about the archaeology and historic past, then that is still there for people to see and find out about. It's not removing any fabric. So it's a way of addressing proposals for the bridge at this point, that has a minimal impact on the fabric.
The purpose, as I understand it, of this covering up that particular section of the bridge is not really part of the flood protection scheme. It's not about holding back the water. It's about providing a kind of ramped access onto the bridge. So that it's really not, that component is really not an essential part of a flood protection scheme. So would it not be better to simply not involve that component, to simply leave that out?
With regards to whether it's part of the flood protection scheme, I think that's a design issue and perhaps best left to be addressed by Graham Pert or another. But there are other public benefits that can be incorporated into this proposal, and that includes making the bridge accessible. So that's part of the kind of improvements to the area, and also improvements to the bridge, that people can experience it and get better appreciation. And that's to people who might be mobility impaired as well, which they can't do at the moment because there are steps. So it enables that to be incorporated to improve, so everyone has an improved experience and able to get onto the bridge and benefit from views, etc., from the bridge.
Are you aware that the other side of the bridge isn't really DDA compliant in the sense that it's a bit too steep, I think, for most wheelchairs? So effectively, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that in order to get wheelchair users onto one side of the bridge only, that justifies modifying substantially, in my opinion, that end of the bridge.
I am not professionally equipped to be able to advise on whether the bridge is fully accessible. That's for somebody else.
I'll move on, sorry. Mm-hmm. You mentioned down at the bottom of that page, it's a bullet point, changes to the setting of the bridge. That the defence wall will have the greatest impact on the setting of the bridge, changing the character and appearance that has existed since the early 19th century. You're mentioning the greatest impact there. I mean, that sounds like a very substantial impact. We certainly think it is. And you mentioned at the bottom, you think that the public realm enhancements will improve the wider setting of the bridge and the public appreciation of the heritage asset. Are you aware of the number of, a large number of people have objected to this modification to that end of the bridge, and you seem to be saying here, or accepting, that it does in fact have a great impact at that location.
I think you are using the word to your own benefit here. So in terms of the level of impact that we have assessed as part of the impact assessment, there are a number of factors that come into play. So there's beneficial and there's adverse effects on the bridge. So overall, on balance, the greatest impact is to the setting. That's not to say it is a great impact.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm just pointing out that in paragraph 216 you talk about design development and embedded mitigation, and then in paragraph 220 you use the phrase proposed mitigation to further reduce the impact on the works on Evergilla Bridge. One of the design themes throughout this whole scheme, I feel, has been mitigation, that there are adverse impacts and effects on not just the bridge but the whole area, and it's about designers, people like yourself, having to find ways to mitigate that. Is that a fair statement?
I'm not really sure if that's a question or what you're trying to ask me to respond to.
Well, you're talking about design, development and embedded mitigation. You're implying that mitigation is embedded in the whole design development. It's all about mitigation, really. And mitigation is about, well, making something bad less severe or whatever, or dealing with impacts which may be negative you're trying to make better.
Did we not cover that question
All right.
earlier on?
If we could just maybe have a little look at paragraph 2.24, which relates to the Historic and Environment Scotland policies, which, and I'm grateful for you adding 3.18, we've been particularly concerned about, 3.16, 3.19. Do you think that this intervention is the minimum level of, with regard to paragraph 3.16, it talks about normally it should be the minimum level of intervention that is consistent with conserving what is culturally significant. Do you think this intervention in the bridge is the minimal?
Yes, I do. And also I would just, as going back to the point about what is the most significant part of the bridge, it is the mid-level intervention that's consistent with conserving what's culturally significant in the monument. The culturally significant part of the monument is its 17th century masonry, and they are not touched.
If I was to be able to produce a flood prevention scheme or design that held back the water but didn't touch the bridge at all, would you not think that would be even more minimum then?
I think we'd need to assess that in a similar way that we've assessed these proposals.
That option was never put to you, or you were never asked to comment on any other option?
I haven't seen any proposals that you might have put forward, so I can't comment on that.
You're not aware then that there was an option appraisal done by the council that looked at two options, and one of them was a rising wall solution which could be built back from the bridge and effectively not touch it at all? You were never involved in that? Or?
I was not involved in that options appraisal, but I would imagine that it could potentially also have impacts on the archaeological remains associated with bridge through excavation. So, it's a scheduled monument. There are below ground remains as well associated with the bridge. So, that would need to be assessed as a separate exercise. And
apologies. In paragraph 3.19, HES talk about clearly generating public benefits of national importance, and I put the stress on the word national. What nationally important benefit do you think we get from this intervention?
So I guess in 3.19, it's for Historic Environment Scotland to make that determination, because just for the benefit of the reporter, this is in response to criteria that Historic Environment Scotland will need to go through when assessing scheduled monument consent. So they would first need to determine whether it is extensive intervention, and as we have already gone through the HIA process, and it relates to works directly affecting the bridge. So the HIA has determined that actually the works to the bridge are minimal because the physical works to the bridge. That means actual works that affect the fabric of the bridge have been designed to be as minimal as possible. So that they would need to determine whether it's considered to be extensive intervention. And then they would need to determine whether the public benefits of a flood protection scheme to a town, and also whether improved accessibility to the bridge and greater public appreciation of the bridge is a sufficient public benefit to counter the interventions proposed. That's for Historic Environment Scotland to determine. Sorry, I would just counter, just going back to comments that you've made. The Historic Environment Scotland have responded to our proposals for that in a letter, and they conclude also, because it also relates to cultural significance, and they also confirm that this part of the bridge is not the most culturally significant part of the monument. So it's a level of impact.
No, I do accept that it's not the most culturally significant or even historically significant, but I still think it's significant.
So you don't think it's culturally significant or historically significant, but significant to you?
Sorry, was there a question there, Mr. Dyson?
Move on, sorry. Now, under paragraph 2.25, you mention the impact of the scheme on the spatial, historic and visual characteristics. This is to do with the conservation area. And could I just say, I think the spatial bit's critical. No, I'll leave it because I think we've covered that earlier. So there's no point in repeating that, is there? Mm-hmm. You say in paragraph 2.26 that the assessment of the impact of the character on the conserve area, the scheme, will affect the visual permeability and historic connections between the Whitesands and River Nith. I know you then go on to say that on balance, etc. But you do accept, I'm asking you, you do agree with that statement, that the scheme will affect the visual permeability. This is, again, where you're having to mitigate that adverse impact.
Yes, I agree with the statement. I wrote it. The assessment, but in terms of assessing impact on, there's a balance of benefits and adversity, and there is some changes. I mean, there is change, you know. There is change within the conservation area, and there is so the kind of visual permeability and historic connections, there is change to that. So it is. So what it says is that it will affect the visual permeability and historic connections between the Whitesands and River Nith. So yeah, it affects because there is change.
A negative change that then you're mitigating against with or bringing in the public realm improvements to try and mitigate.
It's beneficial and adverse. It's not necessarily always negative. The effect is not always negative. So there are improvements that will actually improve the visual permeability by removing cars. You know, sort of actually your aspect from the Whitesands will be improved by removing the car parking, and other elements such as the toilet block and things like that would actually improve your visual permeability relating to the conservation area and setting of the historic buildings, etc.
You mentioned a few times the removal of the car parking as if that's detrimental in a heritage sense. Would you not agree that the car park is in fact culturally and heritage significant in continuing the centuries-long activity in that location?
Mr Dyson, I think you've already asked that question too.
I maybe wasn't too happy with the answer, I don't know, but okay.
I would just say I don't agree.
Okay, I think that completes my questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Dyson. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. First one's really just a point of clarification. On the order itself, let's get it in my hand, we've got a list of the works. I don't know if you've got a copy, if you have a copy, but I'll read out to you what it says. It lists the specific locations, and then it lists the works in an itemised manner. And under Devergilla Bridge Museum, there's a reference MUS1, and it's construction of flood resilience works to the museum. That's also cross-referenced in the plans that accompany the order. Your recognition seems to indicate that there's no works at all to that museum. I'm just trying to clarify what the correct position is.
That might have been works that I was not aware of, if that's the case. I was not aware of any works at I'm assuming you referred to the Folk Museum, the west end of the bridge. I was not aware of any construction works being undertaken. At that point, along the river, I was under the impression that all the works were at the east end along Whitesands. So that might just be some information I was not aware of.
Thanks very much. It's just quite. It's not clear to us either what exactly was meant by that.
It's not on the drawings that I have seen. So.
When you were making your assessment of the impacts on the setting of the Devergilla Bridge, did you take into consideration what impacts there might be from the proposed raised planters on either side of the walkway that links to the steps and the lane?
I'm just trying to think of the planters that you might be referring to. So either side of the steps as part of the kind of the.
I don't have the visualisations in front of me. Sorry, but in the sketch proposals,
yes,
there are a set of steps that lead down. You've got the ramp, and then the steps lead to the public footpath and the road at Whitesands, which then aligns with the lane as you talk about. But on either side of those steps there are raised planters, and I just wondered if those at all were taken into consideration in terms of the impacts on the setting of the bridge.
Yes, they would have been if they're included within the visual, the drawings that I have seen, yes.
Sorry, I couldn't find any reference to them in the assessment.
It might be that I didn't think that they were particularly relevant in terms of that proposal, because you look at a proposal in the whole and in the round, and you do look at individual elements, but it might be that I didn't think they were particularly relevant to reference.
Thank you. Just one last point. Obviously, you've had the benefit of the discussions and the correspondence with Historic Environment Scotland. In their response to the Council, which is document BH05, which is the letter you were referring to a minute ago, It's one point. I was just wondering if you could help me understand what they mean. They refer to the views of the east end of the bridge. It's just it's just the one comment. I'll read it out to you. What they say is the present views of the east end of the bridge are not of primary importance in the cultural significance of the monument. I'm just wondering if what you would take from that. What do they actually mean by that? Why that part is of less importance than the rest of the bridge?
I think you have to take the bridge in its whole context. As I mentioned before, the east end of the bridge is a later formation, if you like, of the bridge, and it probably refers to that, but also the east end of the bridge is a part of the bridge. You know, the bridge itself and its appreciation of the bridge and your views of the bridge, you know, it crosses over the river and you see all the surviving 6 arches across the west end. So the views of the bridge aren't just of the east end. You know, it's looking at within its wider context and its entirety, if you like.
Okay, I was just trying to clarify if there was anything specific that I needed to understand about that particular aspect of the bridge, but there's nothing different in the views from the eastern end of the bridge as there would be from the western end of the bridge. That elevation has got nothing different about it from the remainder of the bridge.
Yeah, it has. It is very different because of the western end of the bridge is largely as it was in the 17th century. The east end of the bridge is as it is from the early 19th century and the 18th century. As I said, that part of the bridge it's a shortened part of the bridge. It's lost 3 arches, so that was actually created and formed in the 19th century, the steps and that form of the bridge. So it is different, very different, yeah.
Sorry, right, that's what I was just trying to narrow down. So it's really in relation to the change, to the truncation of the arches and the steps. It's not about that whole elevation of the bridge having less significance than the rest of the bridge.
Sorry, when you're talking about elevation, do you mean elevation across the river or the...
That's what they seem to be suggesting. It says the present views of that east end are not of primary importance, and what they're talking about is the views towards the bridge from the east. I
wonder, ma'am, if it might be fairer on the witness if I allowed her to have the letter in front of her. This is VH5, as previously identified.
Page 5, and it's paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. Paragraph 4. Second paragraph from the bottom of page 5. And it's really just to help our understanding of how Historic Scotland have interpreted the bridge.
I think this goes back to its cultural significance, as I was explaining before. The east end of the bridge is not a significant or particularly significant part of the bridge because of the changes that have happened, and that is the east end of the bridge. So that's your views of the east end of the bridge are a view and an impression that is from the 19th century, early 19th century onwards. The significance of the bridge is the fact that it's, I think, one of very few, might be stone bridges across the river from the 17th century. So it's actually its significance as a very early stone bridge in Scotland. The east end of the bridge, as a 19th century component of that, is not a significant part in terms of overall cultural significance of the bridge, if you see what I mean. So that's the views of it have been created. I would add also there's some other notable, not notable, but there are other interventions that have happened over, so in the 20th century around that east end of the bridge to create the bus terminus and things like that actually affect the kind of views of the east end as well, whereas the west end is more as it was, if you like, in the 17th century.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
What would you say is the spatial extent of the setting of Devagalla Bridge?
I'm not sure.
Is it possible to actually define spatially the setting? Could you draw a line on a map and say, well, that's the limit of its setting?
I suppose it's as long as you can see it. Its setting, but but if you are looking at kind of what are the most important aspects of its setting, it's how you see it crossing the river rather than an end of the bridge. So the setting of the bridge is more significant in terms of, as well as views from the bridge, as well, across to Dumfries and Maxwell Town on the other side, and its composition with other river crossings and in its relationship with the river is its most significant part of its setting and its views to it, and that's looking at its views in its entirety as it crosses the river.
When you're both the impact on the bridge or on the conservation area, and you're making a judgment as to the magnitude of impact, whether you're deciding, for example, whether it should be minor or moderate, do you take into account what you consider adverse and beneficial to come up with a conclusion?
That's right. It has to be a balanced view, so it's not just one thing that you're considering. So, you take it is a balanced view based on, if you like, professional judgment. So you do take into account improvements, and you do take into account things that might have an adversity. Balance it out, and also takes into account the importance of the particular asset, if you like.
So, in your heritage assessment, you define what a moderate impact is and a minor impact. And just in summary, a minor is a slight change to key aspects of setting. In deciding that the magnitude of impact is minor in your view, you've taken into account both the positive and negatives overall. It's not just... It's the overall change.
Yes.
Mr. Connell,
I have nothing further, ma'am.
Okay, could we take a short break now to prepare for the next witness, and we'll reconvene at 5:02?
Ma'am, just before I introduce my next witness, I have some information I can provide. I'll provide it, and then you can see if anything more is needed. You asked, ma'am, about the reference in the order to the museum. First of all, can I confirm, although this is confirmable by the drawings and other materials, that there are no construction works to the museum or which affect the museum in a physical sense. Secondly, can I confirm that nothing is intended to be done to the museum which would require listed building consent? So nothing of that kind. The museum is managed by the council. The intention, details to be worked out in due course, was simply that it should be identified that what I might describe as flood resilience works might be done, and that might be as simple as when repointing was being done, that should be done in a way to assist to prevent the ingress of water, or it might involve something like what I've been asked to describe as a tight fit door being provided in response to any flood event, not one that requires fixings or anything of that kind to the building, but simply a temporary structure, so that the reference in the order identifies the intention to look at that the precise details have been left for the moment.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
My next witness is Mr. Graham Pert, formerly of Gillespie's, where the designer is now practicing on your own account, I think, Mr. Pert, is that correct? I think we heard from in the course of the last witness's evidence that you worked with some of the other professionals involved, such as Catherine Kidd and Susan Irwin, on the design of the scheme which is now before this inquiry. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And I think, in effect, you set that out in paragraph 1 of your summary precognition. I wonder if you could just start at paragraph 2.
My evidence focuses on the visible design proposals and why they developed the way they have. The evidence deals with the integration of landscape with flood protection, the interface with the important built heritage, and how the proposals have sought to ameliorate the visual impacts from a major civil engineering infrastructure project within a conservation area. My precognition identifies my reference documents as 5 project reports, 2 letters to me from HES, and 2 relevant design publications by the Scottish Government. As design consultants at Whitesands, Gillespie's brief was a combination of understanding client requirements and responding to the potential of the site, particularly through consultation. There were 3 client constraints that emerged as direction for the design, all of which I considered as being reasonable. These were that flood protection should keep back from the river walls, that dependence on moving parts should be minimised with permanent solutions maximised, that flood solutions in the Whitesands core area should be contained within the existing curb line. In addition to cost, project risk, engineering and ecological advantages, these constraints also provided heritage, amenity and visual impact benefits.
In the next section, you touched briefly on consultation and so forth. You'll be aware that there is a section on community engagement taking place later in this inquiry, but if you could just deal with paragraph 4, please.
Several design approaches were considered and appraised from the outset. Public consultation influenced design, particularly after the January 2015 public consultation event. A meeting with HES in Dumfries provided advice on the eastern landing of Devergilla Bridge and its relationship with the town. The design was developed through a balanced approach to site constraints, client risk, project opportunities, public and HES responses to the interim proposals. The public presentation of the final scheme was then communicated through the computer animation video and virtual reality headsets at the November 2016 event in St George's Hall. This revealed how far the project had developed from previous iterations and how consultation had influenced the design. For some attendees, the easily accessible video medium was acknowledged as a helpful myth-busting exercise. The benefits of the project and its fit for the site were presented in a way that was clear, with remaining objections on visual and heritage aspects now harder to sustain.
Thank you. Carry on to section 5, please.
The Whitesands project is for flood protection, to keep Whitesands safe, healthy and dry, to keep the traffic moving and to address issues of blight caused by a location that has a national profile in the media as a place of flooding.
The site is also a conservation area containing listed buildings and a scheduled monument. The notion that a major infrastructure project could be imposed on such a site without an integrated landscape and public realm approach is inconceivable. The site is historically and culturally significant. The views out from the Whitesands Esplanade have the potential to present what could be one of the most attractive waterfronts of any Scottish town. Dumfries and Galloway Council have acknowledged this by having a non-engineering design-led process from the outset. A public realm dimension to such a project is surely inevitable and essential if the flood protection proposals are to be acceptable. I consider that the engineering design and the landscape are well integrated and that the public realm has been designed to address the imbalance between vehicles and pedestrians, providing new places for riverside activities. Public realm design is not to be a bolt-on at the end of a project. Instead, a balanced approach is needed that promotes the role of the pedestrian. Scottish Government advice is that placemaking is to be front and central to the design of public projects.
We now turn to the design principles and some other specific issues.
The Whitesands project is predicated upon design principles. These are the ideas from which the landscape proposals have been developed. 16 landscape and public realm design principles were identified in Section 4 of Gillespie's Whitesands Project Landscape Report, SD25. These are listed in abbreviated form in my precognition. The Whitesands project is one scheme with a uniform flood protection standard. However, it is a large site across a number of different character areas with differing physical constraints. These require a range of different design responses. The appropriate type of solution has been selected for each site. The diversity of the project was effectively communicated in the video. The 7 different design solutions are listed in my precognition.
You're now turning to Devergilla Bridge, in which you had an involvement as well as Catherine Kidd, I understand.
Yes, the most sensitive site at the Whitesands is around the Devergilla Bridge. Comprising of 9 arches originally, it was reduced to 6 when the Whitesands thoroughfare was constructed. The truncated east end was terminated with steps. The proposed flood protection line passes behind the bridge to the east, with the structure between being infill walls with backfill material carefully placed so as not to damage the existing building bridge fabric. Objections that the project is destroying the Devergilla Bridge are not the case, as all is retained, every stone and every step. HES have been consulted at several stages in the design process and are not objecting, having given helpful advice which has been accepted. I am pleased with the extent and nature of the dialogue with HES and the degree of unanimity. This has covered strategic issues such as the benefit of relocating car parking to detailed issues such as the fixing of proposed handrails. I am confident that a compelling application for scheduled monument consent can be lodged.
Thank you. Now you're now turning to a different issue, which is views.
A key feature of the proposals is the raised walkway, which will provide an attractive new pedestrian route from which to view the Nith. Seating is incorporated at vantage points to enjoy the elevated prospect. The shallow grass embankment slopes will be popular for informal seating overlooking the river on warm, sunny days. The esplanade and railings are retained so that views of the river and its bridges can continue to be enjoyed along the full length of the project. The need to minimise visual impact has been a major factor in the iterations of the project in 2015 and 2016. The concern to retain the visual link between the riverside and the town side of the flood protection barrier has changed the design and brought about the introduction of the glass panels and then a bespoke temporary demountable aluminium panel system to surmount the glass panels. The height differential between the back of the Whitesands footway and the raised walkway is always less than 1.4 metres, and mostly somewhat less, allowing intervisibility through the glass. The 3D video walkthrough section seeks to convey impartially what the impact of the flood defences will be on views, and consider the temporary protection from demountable panels in the sensitive core area for rare flood events to be a very positive aspect of the proposals. The glass balustrade will provide transparency and pedestrian animation at the line of flood protection. The low bund will have an impact, but one that approximates to the existing condition with parked cars. The retained riverside esplanade has a raised walkway. Grass banks and trees provide interest and softening to cross-river views from Bridge House, Mill Road and Mill Green.
Now you turn to deal with a number of matters which are dealt with more fully in your precognition and summarised here, which respond to objections.
My precognition summarises the main objections and provides a response, further abbreviated below. Proposals have insufficient detail, are incomplete or outline only. Response: productions go well beyond minimum requirements. Proposals are too modern and not in keeping. Response: all new walls are of red sandstone. In the most visually sensitive areas, paving surfaces would be in natural stone, as would steps throughout the project. Such a high quality specification is commensurate with a conservation area and the setting of listed buildings. HES advise that new construction should be delineated from original rather than imperceptibly blend. Existing and proposed art installation locations affirm the project's local identity. The design of new work will be simple, modest, restrained and contemporary, relying on the quality of design and materials. There is too much glass and aluminium. Response: glass is selected for its transparency, aluminium for its strength and resilience. Aluminium forms the framing around the glazing and is the material for the demountables due to the lightness of weight. The proportion of glass to aluminium framing would be optimised during detailed design stage to give as much transparency as possible. The demountables are only temporary and for installation during more severe flood warning periods and training exercises. Glass and aluminium are materials that are part of the urban scene, such as bus stances and street furniture, which are accepted as part of contemporary townscape. The overall perception of the scheme will come from the entire design, including soft elements of grass, shrubs and trees. To the town side of the flood defence, the foreground of a planted embankment behind a low red sandstone wall with groups of trees will significantly ameliorate the impact of glass panels. The line of protection could have been nearer the shop fronts. Response: a solution with the protection line to the west of the carriageway near to the western footway could be like a continuous wall without variety. Setting the defence line back from the carriageway and footway as proposed allows for an attractive landscape treatment of shrubs and trees to line the thoroughfare. The height of the permanent barrier is too high. Response. Design changes have reduced the height to a level related to human scale, allowing intervisibility. Historic river views and Devergilla Bridge views are lost or compromised. It is acknowledged that the proposals have an impact on views as they are a significant change to the site. However, views of the river and bridges from the river side esplanade are totally unaffected. My recognition makes reference to the positive TVIA and HIA conclusions and HES comments. The ramp onto Devergilla Bridge is not required or reasonable. Response. The Devergilla Bridge was originally accessed by horses and carts. The proposed ramp provides a barrier-free access onto the bridge for the first time in 2 centuries. This is a public benefit. Not to provide compliant access onto the scheduled monument could be considered discriminatory. HES consider it acceptable. Visual representations are questionable. Response. Visual representations are accurate. The setting of the Devergilla Bridge and can and should be protected. Response. Any flood protection scheme for the Whitesands would have an impact on the setting of the bridge. The advantage of the proposals is that the approaches to the bridge from the Dumfries side will be flood protected, which is considered a public benefit. The setting of the bridge will be enhanced by removal of river sediment vegetation and encroaching self-seeding trees that have colonised the bank, choking the easternmost arch of the bridge. This part of the watercourse will be returned to full use, all of which HES considers acceptable. Proposals for the Devergilla Bridge are contrary to HES policies 316 and 319. Response. Both elevations of the Devergilla Bridge will remain fully visible. The flood defence line is kept back from the monument and is connected by an infill structure. Nothing of the existing bridge masonry, walling or steps is removed, and the conservation principle of reversibility is respected. I consider that the proposals are consistent with a minimum level of intervention. The older and relatively more historically valuable areas of Devergilla Bridge are to the west end, which is also noted by HES. The proposals provide a well-considered and balanced response to the challenges of the site. An attractive environment will be created that will have a positive impact on Dumfries. By properly integrating the civil engineering with the landscape, an opportunity to transform the public realm is possible. Best endeavours have been used to minimise visual impacts, as the design development chronology indicates. New viewpoints for the Nith and a new, more appropriate land use for the Whitesands will be provided that will transform the current sterile environment and enhance the wider area. The Devergilla Bridge will recover its long-lost accessibility and be sensitively incorporated into the landscape proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Pitt. Mr. Connell.
Thank you, ma'am. Can I ask you about a matter that cropped up among other places yesterday, Mr. Pert, the proposals for the area known as the Greensands, you know, the area that we're talking about when I mentioned that. You're familiar with that?
Yes, the Greensands is the area to the north and is currently used as a car parking area, formerly the swimming pool site. There the Riverside Walkway and the National Cycle Route are retained, and that continues up to the pedestrian crossing further beyond the site.
The issue that was arising in the course of yesterday was whether what is proposed for the green sands amounted to some form of destruction or damage to a green space at the green sands. Do you agree with that description?
No, I don't. The video animation, I think, is very helpful in addressing this point, in that it starts at the very outset by a fly-through along the river with views of the riverbank, the riverside walkway, the trees that are retained, the extent of dimension between the river and any car parking. So the nearest is 15 metres, and most of it is beyond 20 metres. So the experience of Whitesands as a riverside walkway and a place with mature trees is retained in the proposals.
Thank you. Can I now turn to the Whitesands area? The proposal contains glass panels, which I think you've mentioned as creating intervisibility. Just focusing on the Whitesands area for the moment, an issue has been raised as to what you can actually see if you're, say, on the pavement on the Whitesands on the side near the river with these panels. Can you comment on that?
The proposals have the solid part of the protection at the base, then the glass panels above and the demountables on the top. The raised walkway sits on the solid base part of the defence, and that is at a height never more than 1.4 metres above the back of the footway. So one of the things about that is that it relates the whole assembly to human scale. On the walkway, the glass balustrade or the glass panels are at balustrade height, relating to human scale, and the solid portion of the base is something that relates to eye level, so that from the standard eye level of a standing person of 1.5 metres, you can see horizontally. So that would provide people walking along the footway with more than a view of sky and clouds, tops of trees. So there would be a horizontal aspect to that sight line.
Thank you. Well, I just ask you one question about a point that we had a little about this morning. At the moment, the Whitesands primary use might be described as a car park. That's obviously going to change. You viewed as the fact that it's going to change matter? Is that a problem?
I think we can see that change is part of what towns do. Change is part of what riverbanks do. The Green Sands was originally a vegetated beach. Mill Green was originally an industrial area. Dock Park and the landscaped Dockhead were originally Dumfries Port. These are all areas that have changed over time and have accepted a landscape environment, a greening of these places, and I would imagine it would be totally unacceptable if these were to revert back to what they were in earlier times. Whitesands would originally be a tidal beach. Then with the building of the river wall, different uses were possible. Cattle market, now a car park. So I think we can see that the towns and riverside are elements within our environments that can change and in healthy environments, they do change. So the concept of providing a connection between the dock park and the green sands environment with a green connection, and thereby enhancing the environment for pedestrians, for cyclists and for motorists driving on the Whitesands, is one that I think can be embraced as a positive development for Dumfries.
I only have one further question. We're here to consider the existing scheme, but there has been some discussion about a thing called a rising barrier. Earlier in the inquiry, we heard that as things currently stand, the installation of a rising barrier would require, apart from a wall of about 900 millimetres, the installation of posts of about 3 metres anyway, at 10 to 15 metre centres along whatever route was selected. Can you offer any assistance on the impact that would have in the area?
As I state in my precognition, any flood protection scheme will have an impact on Dumfries and have a visual impact on the Whitesands. The option of the self-rising barrier is not some invisible design that magically rises out the ground. It is one that is a major civil engineering infrastructure project that digs into the ground, disturbs that environment, which might have archaeological benefit in some areas. There is a visual impact with the rails which each of the rising barriers must slide up and down. These panels have to withstand the forces of the full river at the 1 in 75-year event. And so the engineering of the vertical posts needs to be at a centre and of a magnitude to be able to withstand that. So if we envisage these stanchions marching down the Whitesands, there's a visual coalescing of these at a height of the 1 in 75-year return period. So the full height of the defence is what these stanchions would have, and for me that presents a visual impact which is certainly significant. Where there are sewage outfalls, I imagine you couldn't have a recessed solution, and where you have gateways, you would have, as at present, as the current proposals show, you would have full height gate posts to either side of those. So every solution has impacts, and the self-rising barrier solution has impacts which shouldn't be overlooked.
I have no further questions, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dyson, can I hand over to you, please?
Yeah. Just following on from that point, Mr. Pert, is there any lighting proposed for your scheme, for the council scheme? Will there not be the odd lamppost, or have you nothing planned at all in those regards? Is it going to be very dark down there?
No, we've gone into the lighting of the site throughout, and if you wish I can refer you to the plans which cover that. So we have lighting so that there is amenity lighting in all areas.
Sorry.
Yes, there are lampposts. There are lampposts at the back of the esplanade. There are lampposts on the back of the footway in the Whitesands thoroughfare. And from those two sources, we can illuminate the esplanade and the raised walkway. So that's a catch-all provision. I think what I would like to note is that I don't see a correspondence between vertical elements that are channels for a rising barrier scheme and need to fulfill the structural performance of holding back the nith in a 1 in 75 year event as equating at all to a lamppost.
But I mean, with imaginative, artistic, creative people, we have heard that these verticals for the rising wall can in fact take lighting columns, and I would imagine that would be a marvellous sculpture or exercise for some of our artists. That could be very imaginative lighting, perhaps even more imaginative than just picking a lamppost out of a catalogue.
The street furniture for the project is subject to the detailed design stage. What we have indicated is a range of street furniture that can have a cost put against it and shows that we will be providing seating, lighting and so on. These are selected so as not to be visually intrusive. They're circular, tapering, they'll be elegant. So we're minimizing the impact from that. We're good, but we're not magicians. You know, we can't turn a civil engineering bit of kit into. You can put a light on it, you could put a flag on it, you could do all sorts of stuff with it, but it mustn't prevent, and I would say could not disguise its primary function, which would be to hold back a 1 in 75 year flood event. So I think the notion that the esplanade light fitting intervals with a minimal design equates to the tarting up of the stanchions. It's just not an equivalence. Sorry.
No, I agree. It could be a lot better. You know, I'm a designer. I would love a challenge like that, and I know designers that would really have a go at trying to make something really exciting out of these. But we'll move on. The car parking on the Whitesands, you've kind of suggested that's a very detrimental thing there.
Well, I was interested to see the proposals by, or the illustrations provided by Mr. Waterhouse, who gave evidence yesterday. And he had several international exemplar projects which he was promoting as good design, as positive riverside environments. He was asked if any was a flood protection scheme, and the answer was no. But I would have asked the obvious question, is any of these a car park? And the answer is no. Now, I find that significant, that someone should come to a public local inquiry, should show examples of riverside environments as world exemplars for us to learn from. And in none of these is the importance of car park enshrined. Rather the opposite. They are areas that are given over to pedestrians, to hard and soft landscaping. In many of the ways, I know Felix wouldn't agree with this, but in many of the schemes you can see the components that comprise the Whitesands project as presented. So I think your own colleague has made my case that if we are to have a public realm environment that is befitting for Dumfries and that is commensurate with its significance historically, culturally, then there is a problem here.
My question was really about, is the car parking on the Whitesands a detrimental thing?
Yes.
You propose to take the Greensands and put that detrimental component or components in that location, on that nice green leafy space?
Yes. Refer to my earlier comments about the retention of trees, the planting of trees, the retention of the riverside walkway, and the distance that car parking is being kept back from the river edge. I enjoy your question, which is why should we take the cars from one part of the town centre and put it in another, and why should we take the green from one part of the town centre and put it in another? And I think my answer would be that there is a difference between Greensands and Whitesands. The Dock Park and Greensands will be allowed to flood. They are important spaces for Dumfries, but the proposals are such that these areas would be evacuated and flooding would be allowed to come into them. Not that they're not important, but there is a different order of urban importance to the Whitesands than there is to the Greensands. The Greensands is an amenity area that can be evacuated and has resilience. The Whitesands, however, has businesses, it has dwellings, it has a main thoroughfare, it has cultural and amenity assets. So it is of a different order of urban place to the Greensands. Therefore, I think it's logical and beneficial that the Whitesands is protected and the cars from the Whitesands are placed in alternative locations, including the Greensands.
You remember your Green Fingers illustration, or the Green Fingers illustration, and I thought one of the design principles was to, in a sense, link the Whitesands then with green fingers upstream and downstream. Do you not accept, though, you're really decimating the upstream green space?
If you're asking me, am I the author of the Green Fingers, I would have to say guilty. But I wonder if it's possible to refer to an item in VH25.
Yeah, could you give Mr. Dyson a moment and myself a moment to get hold of that, please?
VH25, it is the Whitesands report, project landscape report.
It's SD25.
Oh, beg your pardon.
Sorry. SD.
And if you could make your way to figure 7 of that document, which would be towards the end. I don't know if it's got numbers on it. So it comes after Section 6, Project Descriptions. Okay. Yeah. I was just wanting to show that picture. That's all. Sorry? Steady. I would refer to this figure 7 from the report, which is a still from the video animation. And this report has several of these snapshots to helpfully illustrate the proposals. And what this one is showing is the Greensands taken on the fly-through near to the beginning that shows a natural edge to the river. It shows the retained grass between the natural edge and the footpath and national cycle route. It shows the retained, refurbished, reconditioned heritage benches that would be along the footpath. It shows the existing mature trees that are behind that footpath, and where there are gaps there would be new tree planting put in there. Then beyond that there is a hedge of new planting which would help to screen the car park. So all of that environment is retained, and I think to suggest that the Greensands is decimated is ridiculous and is not consistent with the figure 7 that we are showing.
Mr. Dyson, are you content that that answers your question?
No. No. I mean, I've got to say, it's a very nice photograph, but it's what I call a seagull's eye view, from the middle of the river. I mean, it doesn't seem to show any cars, does it? Is there any cars in there? Are they hidden somewhere? Sorry. Let me have a look.
I think it might be beneficial if you could maybe just slightly refocus your question so that we can get a more direct answer.
Oh, well, I think I've made my point. I don't want to, keep going when I think a point's already made. I think it's been, from my point of view, I think the point is made, and I'm sure it's not been missed. Okay. A quick one on cyclists. I had difficulty actually finding out what happens to cyclists. I know this is a small point, but how does a cyclist get from one end of the Whitesands to the other without getting off their bike?
So I can describe us from the north to the south.
Description, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. So to the north is the National Cycle Route 7, which sweeps round by the Greensands, past the standard offices. The route is retained as it goes under the Clew Street Bridge. And then it comes up to the area of the Whitesands. So just as at present, cyclists would there be in a situation which is a pedestrian footway. So that's where that arrives at grade at the Whitesands. From there is a route up towards the Devergilla Bridge. So that is the level area, which we could call the emerging raised walkway. That forms a landing at the Devergilla Bridge, and then there is the 1 in 21 slope down from that onto the existing esplanade level. Along the esplanade, the route passes the sandy opening, and then it continues down past the sandy opening, continuing on the river side as at present till it comes towards the dock head area. And then through the dock head area.
Help just to save time. The issue I'm looking for clarification on is really at Devergilla Bridge. Is it the case that cyclists have to dismount, or can they cycle continuously?
I think that's an item for detailed design and management of the cycle route, for detailed consultation, for discussions on what signing would be introduced where and to what extent. So there hasn't been detailed discussion on what signing and what particular management would happen at particular points. So I would leave that one open for future design development.
Okay, I've had a good look at that point, and I'm going to submit to you that it can't be done with your design.
So what can't be done?
That a cyclist will have to dismount. If the cyclists are not allowed onto the raised walkway or to go up off the normal ground level, then they will have to dismount at some point or for some duration. They can't go along the existing pathway, which is at ground level along the riverside, because that's blocked by Devergilla Bridge. They can't go up onto the raised walkway because that's not allowed, so they'll have to dismount. And the only other place they could go is actually onto the roadway. My understanding of that cycle path is that grant was given on that. One of the basis of it was to try and have as few dismounts as possible, because it is a cycle route which goes, I think, all the way from Carlisle to Stranraer. It's a Euro cycle route, in fact. So I'll leave it today, but I have not seen in your design the possibility of the cyclist being able to do that. If it's a matter for the detailed design, fine, but I think it's a problem you're going to have to resolve.
Yes, I think what the layout is showing is that there is a barrier-free route for National Cycle Route 7 to come from the Esplanade and to go down to under the Buccleuch Street Bridge, past the Devergilla Bridge. And yes, how that is managed, I would suggest is left for detailed design and future signing.
Well, thanks for that. I think the signing will be helpful. It will tell cyclists to dismount, but have you seen some of the BMX boys locally?
I think we've taken that point as far as we possibly can
and perhaps
for
the
today.
skateboarders.
No, Mr. Dyson, I think could we move on, please?
Okay. Turn to your recognition, Mr. Pert, and you heard me raising issues about the word mitigate previously, and in paragraph 2.1 you say the proposals have sought to ameliorate the visual impacts, and it's a different word, but it means much the same, doesn't it? Ameliorate, try to make something bad better. You would agree with that?
Yes, I think the bad thing is the flooding of the Whitesands. How much better it would be if they didn't flood and we didn't have to all be here today. The reason we're here today is because they do flood, and there is a will to provide flood protection to the Whitesands. And as I've stated, any flood protection...
Sorry, Mr. Pert, could you maybe answer the point that was put to you? Do you accept that interpretation that it makes something bad better?
It's fine.
Was in specific reference to the visual impact, so thank you. In paragraph 3.3, you say it was also considered that solutions should minimise dependence on moving parts. Am I right in concluding or surmising that there are over 200 demountable panels required here, plus 200 vertical stanchions to slip them into, plus over 400 either, I would have thought, if there's 2 clamps or bolts to... We don't know just how these things are going to be secured, but I would imagine there's at least 200 forms of clamping or bolting these panels down, plus 28, I think, hydraulic openings. Do you think that you've succeeded in coming up with a solution that minimises the dependence on moving parts?
Well, I think there's a difference between a moving part of an installation and something that is added on to the top of it. So the fact that a demountable barrier is moved onto the site isn't the same as saying isn't the same as comparing it with part of the flood protection system that is itself moving. So I don't accept that that's an equivalence, but I don't accept that a demountable barrier is a moving part under 3.3.
Okay, so it's not moving, this demountable barrier. Okay, thank you. You also talked there about you're trying to reduce the risk of component or mechanical failure. That is a thing that certainly concerns us. And you also talked about containing maintenance costs. All these panels, glass panels, everything, that surely your design has not succeeded in containing maintenance costs or even in assuring us of the risk of component failure, particularly with regard to both the panels and the hydraulic openings.
Well, I think the advantage of the proposals is that you can see all of the installation, as opposed to parts of a self-rising barrier scheme where there is installation that is below ground and inaccessible. So it is about reducing the risk. It's about containing it to where you can deal with maintenance and address any issues that occur. How can that be made easier? That's the point.
Okay, thank you. The paragraph 4.1, this brings us to the charrette. And you mentioned that wonderful term, blue sky thinking. I can remember Tony Blair and Alistair Campbell using that. It's of that period, I think, when we both studied in London. Okay. The question here I'm trying to get at is the mock-up that was built on the Whitesands came from the charrette, basically. Would that be correct? And because we've heard about the charrette-led design. Now, that was in 2012. Then we had the master plan. Then in 2015 early, the mock-up was built. Do you accept that that charrette-led design mock-up was just thoroughly not acceptable to anyone, either in the town or even your own design team?
Yes, I think the fuller answer, if I may, it relates to the chronology of the design from the charrette to the mock-up. So if I may just expand on that, in that the charrette design was based on the flood levels we were provided with at the time and for a 1 in 25 year height of defence. Subsequent to that, there was a recalibration of the model, which raised the height of the defences. There was the freeboard element that came on board, which significantly raised the height of the defences. And then there was the level of protection, which increased from 1 in 25 years to 1 in 75 years, which significantly raised the height of the defences. So what we started off with at the charrette was something of so high, and what we ended up with, I admit, driving down a cul-de-sac, was something that was, we had to find a U-turn quick, and it was what it was. My concluding point would be, what is there of that relates to the charrette? I think the principle of having a permanent, as much permanent protection to the 1 in 25 year level as possible, which is what we now have, what we've always had.
Could I thank you for your frankness on that, because I think we all accepted it was a pretty unacceptable solution, and obviously we were pleased that then further works were done. But do you see my point that all the effort that went into the charrette, and we've had that quoted at us for years, ended up with a design solution that really wasn't fit for purpose?
Yes, I think it was the incremental nature in which change occurred, which took us to that point. But the principle that came from the charrette of a permanent solution in place is one that we still have. So you could say that the ethos of the charrette of adding a 1 in 25 year level of protection by a permanent means of defence is what we are looking at today.
I do need to refer just briefly to paragraph 4.3, in which you mention the video fly-through, and you've already shown us that. And you said earlier, I think, under paragraph 1.6, that many of your visualizations you wanted to be of the highest fidelity. I think that was the words you used. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. Are you aware that many people felt that these visualizations, they were very impressive, I have to say, but the feeling was that they may not have been of the highest fidelity in terms of they gave impressions of wrong angles. First of all, as I mentioned, it was a seagull's view, as we call it, of the Whitesands. But also some of the angles, the impression was given, I felt, that from cars on the Whitesands you could see the river. That was the thing that struck me. Do you have any comment to make on this?
The fly-through, walk-through and drive-through, because there are the three components to it, as well as the animation sequence. So that whole animation video was prepared in order to helpfully convey what the intentions were as accurately as possible. Now, we didn't have the time or resource to make them even better, populate them even more. I think Felix would have liked them even fancier, but we did what we could in order to accurately convey things. The key things would be like getting the barrier in the right place, getting the panels of the right height, showing how details work around Devergiller Bridge, getting the main principles of the project in place in a way that people can access and understand. So if there is something that you feel is inaccurate or a wrong angle, then Where? Which view is it that you find is a problem? What angle is it that's not right?
Well, I mentioned one that the impression is given in some of these illustrations that from the roadway, if you're driving along, you can actually see the river. It's a kind of foreshortening of perspective or whatever. I mean, you mentioned that these videos were myth-busting. I think that's your word.
I don't want to get into a debate about this. I think it would be easier if we become a wee bit more focused. Some of this might be things that we can pick up at the site inspections, but if there's something that we could specifically address today, I'm quite happy for the question to proceed.
I just wondered what myths were actually busted.
It wasn't my phrase, myth-busting. It was provided to me by a Right Honourable Member who was attending the St George's Hall event and who came along with his intern and viewed the headset, viewed the video, viewed all the material, and said to me, "This is not what I was led to believe. This is a myth-busting exercise." So that was from an elected representative, Right Honourable Member, who came to mock and stayed to praise.
We shall remain nameless.
Richard Arklett. The view from the car, I think, is too low, not too high. And the standard height for horizontal visibility from vehicles is 1.1 metres, and I think we've been a bit low, in fact. I think you'd see more of an elevated view if it was at the standard 1.1 height, but hey, so I don't think there is a problem there.
Agree to differ and move on, I think. Right. Let me just see where we are, try and catch up. I'm looking at paragraph 5.2, in which you said that the Whitesands Esplanade could have the potential to present what could be one of the most attractive waterfronts of any Scottish town. Do you not agree that that is already the case? It is one of the waterfronts of Scottish towns.
Well, I think it could be. I think it's got all of the components there. It's got the call, the animation of the river downstream, the calm retained water upstream, the pedestrian bridges, the vehicle bridges, 4 fantastic bridges. It's got an existing riverside walkway, an interesting esplanade. So it's got all of the elements. It needs to be lifted out of its current dominant land use. It needs to be turned into a people place. And what that is getting at is the Whitesands could be a fantastic environment. It could be a really special place. And what these proposals are bringing forward is an opportunity to transform this sterile environment into surely what would be an attraction not just for the southwest but for the whole of Scotland. I think it's got everything there to make it a winner.
Thank you. I mean, we already know it's a winner. You mentioned in there also a non-engineering design-led process from the outset, but you then said it was fully supported throughout by engineering consultants and council officers in a range of engineering disciplines. So how is that a non-engineering design-led process with all these engineers in it?
Well, you can't go far without getting into an engineering issue. They're thick on the ground in this project. But I think what the the charrette was about, and what the process has wanted to do is been to say this is about making a place for Dumfries. It's about the identity and enhancing the environment. It's not just about a flood protection scheme. Now that's the catalyst. That is the reason why we're here. But there is a bigger opportunity, and the process has recognised that a bare engineering solution of whatever type that is imposed upon Whitesands is not acceptable. Instead, there needs to be something that starts with place, that respects context, and that seeks to meld together the different disciplines into a coherent proposal.
But surely you agree this is a flood protection scheme we're promoting here. That is an engineering design-led process. That's why all these engineers are there.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I can agree with that.
You mentioned towards the end of paragraph 5.2, in terms of your new places, you mentioned new places for riverside activities. Can you give us an idea of what some of these activities might be?
Yes, so I think what the plans illustrate is that there are opportunities along the length of the proposal to have particular locations of activity, of special places. Now, on the raised walkway, we have widened seating areas at the strategic locations over the Call and downstream, where the ramp comes down to the esplanade. We have created an area where we repositioned the local hero plinth and some terracing behind that. So it's an opportunity that's being provided, an informal environment for activity at a special part of the river. Down at Sandy Opening, we have developed that area to have the potential of a small event space, so that there is a location for a little platform. There is hard terrace type seating. There's grass embankment there, and so on. As we go down, there's seating opportunities, and that continues all the way down to St Michael Street Bridge. And the way in which the bridges are cleared of vegetation can be enjoyed, such as at Buccleuch Street Bridge, the suspension bridge. These are all ways in which you can interact with the existing heritage and see the environment more clearly.
Thank you. So in summary, we'll be able to sitting with views. You mentioned local hero plinth and Sandy Opening event space, all of which are pretty well currently there, in my opinion. I was involved in the Sandy Opening event space in the 90s as a councillor when we got some money from Europe. There is a question, but it's a wee bit background. That space was created as an event space. Now, really, I can only remember one real event ever happening there, and that was the town band went down to play Christmas carols, and they got blown away. It was really horrendous, and no one ever held an event there since, as far as I'm aware. Have you been down there lately and seen the foot of sand that's in there? Yeah. So, are you really confident that we can put on events in that location?
Well, I think what the design is doing is providing opportunities for the place to be used, for ownership to be taken. What we have within our proposals is what's something called an art strategy. Now, what that is there is to be a suitable agent commissioned to prepare a brief for an arts strategy, and that would provide a framework by which all of the activity, art opportunities could be reviewed and assessed.
So, Mr. Pitt, can I just stop you a second? That's not included as part of the order, though?
It is. It's in...
Formally?
Well, I might need to defer to someone on that, but it's certainly part of the St George's Hall exhibition. There was a panel on the Council's art strategy.
Okay, I think perhaps it's not clear that that's included as part of the formal order before us. That's maybe a wider scheme that's anticipated by the Council, but perhaps that could be clarified later.
Leave that one just now. Okay. Paragraph 7.2, you actually refer to, and I think it's 7 different design solutions in the scheme. Yeah. Just looking at them, I've picked up 5 of these design solutions are actually walls. One is demountable barriers, and only one is the raised walkway. And the point, I just want you to confirm to me that in something like a 12 or, well, I think 1,300 metres in total, that there's only 450 metres of bund or raised walkway, and around 850 metres of wall, different types of wall. Would you not therefore agree then that the raised walkway is actually quite a minor component of this scheme? The major component seems to be walls.
Well, it's a relief to get away from the Whitesands for a bit, because the whole project is very extensive. As you know, both sides of the river, going from Greensands, Myth Avenue, right the way down to the pizzeria site in Dock Park. So it is extensive. There are several solutions. Of course, some of these walls are existing walls, like the whole length of the Greensands is an existing wall, and the Greensands would flood in these events, anticipated events, would flood up to that wall. It'll be given greater resilience. So from Myth Avenue all the way down towards the standard offices, that whole range is an existing bit of wall that isn't constructed. So yes, there are walls, but there's existing walls, and there's a whole range of elements here. I think what's important is to understand the height of...
Can we maybe go back to that question? Just, is my understanding correct, Mr. Dowson, that what you're saying is of the proportion of barrier that's to be created, new barrier that's to be created, the bund is a small proportion. Was that your question?
Yes, the bulk of it is walls. I'm just looking for that. So we can...
Okay, if I could maybe put that back to the...
Sorry, I keep forgetting to press off my button. That's an interesting question. I think to give a fair response against each of these 7, you would need to have a percentage as to which proportion of the barrier is solid wall and which proportion of the barrier is transparent glass panel. For example, if you go to Welldale, there would be a 700 high wall and a 700 high glass panel, so it would be 50-50. So to say that it's predominantly walls doesn't take into account the proportion of the barrier that is a wall, and the proportion of the barrier that is a glass panel, and the proportion of the barrier that is a demountable unit.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Dowson, do you want to rephrase that so that I'm not putting words in your mouth?
Okay, I'm trying to get to the point here where if 850 metres of this can be solved by wall, why do we need a bund in the middle? Why haven't we got a wall in the middle? If the wall is perfectly capable of holding back everything, why is the wall not happening at the Whitesands?
The Whitesands is, as we've identified, a special location. It's also where the site widens out. When you're down at Assembly Street, down to Nith Street, St Michael Bridge, that area is restricted in its width and in the opportunity to do alternative solutions apart from a linear solution there. Where the site begins to widen out north of Assembly Street, swelling out to the Bank Street area around Brewery Street and up towards Devergilla Bridge, there is a width there that allows solutions other than wall. So, rather than doing the whole scheme in a restricted option solution, you have at Whitesands an opportunity to do more and better.
But you could build a wall there. It'd be a lot cheaper and a lot less maintenance, in fact. And, you know, your point about the Whitesands being a special place, you know, it's all special places. Dock Park's a special place, but a wall is acceptable there.
Feel as though we're going round in circles a little bit here.
Right. You mentioned in a number of places, and I just want to cover this as a general point, HES, Historic and Environmental Scotland. For instance, you say in paragraph 8.2, HES are not objecting to the Whitesands project proposals. Am I correct in saying that they're not approving the Whitesands project proposals either, because no application has been made?
That's correct.
And that would apply to quite a number of comments you've mentioned about HES, your discussions with them or whatever, where the HES position, do you agree, is that until such times as an application is made, then really there's no... for instance, you also say HES also note that there are impacts, but that the proposals are acceptable. But until such, the point is, until such times as an application is made, the HES position is unknown.
Well, as you know, we've had correspondence with HES, and I would have to say that, on balance, it is supportive of what the Council is bringing forward. We can go into details of paragraphs within the letters, but if you're wanting an overview, I would say that we are well set up for a scheduled monument consent in the future when a design development goes further.
Okay. Right. Thank you. It's just a general point that I was trying to make there. Okay. Thank you. Coming down to paragraph 9.1, and I'm really wanting here to focus. You begin to talk about let me just see, paragraph 9.1, you talk about the shallow grassy embankment slopes will provide popular areas, etc. Now, I've never been able to understand what these slopes are for and why they're there at all. It seems to me that the slopes just take up a massive footprint of space. They're at an angle that isn't suitable for wheelchair users or anyone with mobility issues. They don't seem to perform any function whatsoever that I can see in terms of actually flood barrier or holding back water. Now, I may be wrong in that. You may correct me, but I can't see it. Wouldn't you? Well, give me a defence of these slopes, really, because they seem to be very, very expensive in terms of the land the land they take up. You see, if we didn't have these slopes, we could keep a few cars.
Okay, sorry, can I intervene again? I'm sorry to do this, but I think you need to be a wee bit more specific in your questions, Mr Dowson, so that we can get more specific answers out of Mr Pert.
Okay, I'll try. Right, come on, give me a justification of the slopes then as a design feature, because I can't see it. No,
Sorry,
no.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
That is not a specific enough question. I think you need to ask him for something that is not going to lead to just a general discussion between the two of you.
Okay. I don't know how to
Perhaps we could break it down. We'll take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
Right, your question of what the purpose of the slopes were.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and you said you don't see them having a use for recreation, and you don't see them having a use for flooding.
Mm-hmm.
Can I maybe direct those two questions to Mr Pert then?
Thank you.
Do they have a recreational use, and do they have a use as part of the formal flood protection scheme?
Yes, they do, in answer to both items. For flooding, it is providing the B word, it's abund. It's providing the retention of the river within the channel. What these slopes allow is this raised walkway feature, and we see that as a very positive attraction, that it allows people to walk along the Whitesands from an elevated position and see into the town, see into down onto the river. That's an asset that these slopes provide. It's sorry, I was just going to, I think they would be used. I think people would enjoy sitting on them. I think people would enjoy viewing the river from them. It's kind of Tapsaf territory, and I think that's what they'd be very popular.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr Pitt, that's helpful. Does that address your concerns, Mr Dowson?
Yes, if I could just ask a supplementary. Do you accept it would be possible to design a raised walkway and build it without slopes leading up to it? I've seen many raised walkways throughout the world that don't have slopes on them.
Well, I think what we're trying to do is create a pleasant riverside environment, and that is a priority. It'll mean that when you're walking or sitting on the esplanade, you will have some mass screening from the thoroughfare of traffic going past. It will have a special microclimate of shelter. We hope from the right side, but it's from one side certainly. So it will contribute to making it a different place and a better place.
Do you accept that on the raised walkway there's a need for railings on both sides of the pathway for just simple public safety reasons?
I would hope that wouldn't be necessary. The slope that we have in the steepest areas of grass slope is 1 in 3. So that is the industry standard for health and safety maintenance to grass embankments for someone who is employed to cut grass, for example. If it's 1 in 3, it is deemed to be safe. The raised walkway is generally 2.5 metres wide. There's a further 500 millimetres beyond that, which takes the gentle curve down to the slope. So I would think that is a shallow enough slope to prevent any need for a handrail to that side. I think that should be resisted by, but that's something for discussion. Certainly further on, the slope shallows out much more beyond the sandy opening, but I would hope that we do not have a barrier to the riverside of the raised walkway.
Have you checked this out with building control and health and safety experts? Because to my mind, you will need a second balustrade at that, certainly at that highest level.
Well, there are building control elements of the project that will need to go through that process of the Technical Standards Scotland, wall heights and so on. All that has to go through. So the project will be submitted for building control. It will come under that scrutiny. So that is something that is ahead at detailed design stage. But I would resist the call to have any handrail there. I think it's not necessary, and I think it's a much simpler design without it.
Sure it is, but I think the safety issues may... It would be prudent, certainly, I would have thought, to certainly consider it. If there was a requirement to have a second balustrade, would that be made of glass as well as the other one?
Well, I think we would need to see whether a second balustrade is necessary. I don't think it is necessary. I think that the slopes are easy slopes down that would be, a fit, healthy person could negotiate them. And we should be trying to keep that as open as possible. So it's a hypothetical question that I don't think we would be looking to second guess.
I'm a bit concerned about unfit, unhealthy persons perhaps not being able to negotiate it.
Okay, I think we've fully explored that one. Can we move on?
We've got that point, right, okay. But it is significant that, I find it significant that, I have to be honest with you, you don't seem to know the answer to that question after 8 years of design.
Mr. Dyson, please, could you confirm a question or not? I think we're heading into making statements here.
We come to the eye levels, the 1.4. I did raise this yesterday. I think have you accepted that if the glass is at 1.4 and looking at eye levels of around 1.5, 1.6, that people will only see, assuming there's only one, not two balustrades, but people will only see tops of trees and clouds really from the street side?
Well, in my precognition, I've tried to give a helpful comparison to the height of the permanent barrier as being equivalent to a motor car, and which the Whitesands has. So, I mean, there are no cars in production at the moment in the UK or on sale in the UK apart from sports cars that are below 1.4. Everything is above 1.4 metres in height. And I give a couple of examples there of the minis. So if you're wanting a comparison about what you can see over, that can help. The height is such that you can look horizontally, so you're not having to look up, but you could look horizontally from the back of the footway through the glass to whatever is at that level.
And what do you think you would see even at that lowest level? You wouldn't see very much, would you?
Well, you see what you will see what you will see. I mean, we can go on to site. We can mock up these heights. There is a walk around. We can get these locations, and we can jolly well find out what you do see from any particular point. That's possible.
I would agree. I think that we will look at that a bit further at the site inspections.
And you would agree that on the raised walkway, the glass performs no function other than a barrier. It's not about visibility, because you can lean on the barrier, look over the barrier, you get a live view. You don't have to look through glass.
From the raised walkway. Yeah, the purpose of the glass barrier is to provide the protection and to provide intervisibility, light and animation to the scene, to the installation from the lower levels. It's not to provide anything at the raised walkway where you're looking over the glass panels.
Would you agree at that level, though, in terms of protection, you could achieve the same with a sandstone wall, which might be more in keeping with the bridge and other materials?
Well, I find that a bit shocking, a bit surprising, that you would want to put a sandstone wall to the height of the glass balustrade in the middle of the site. So we've been there, we've pulled back from that, Mr. Dowson, and now we've found ways of integrating sight lines, intervisibility into the scheme that avoids the permanent opaque barriers that we had earlier, 2015.
Thank you. I'll try and move on a little bit quicker if I can. I'm sorry it's taken...
So can I just have an estimate of how long you might still have, Mr. Dyson? Because it's now 25 past 12. I'm not trying to rush you, but I'm just trying to get an estimate.
I would think it probably at least another half hour. Right. It's just a small point, but would you accept that the cars being parked, I mean, you've compared the bund, which is a fairly constant thing, with cars being parked. But the way cars are parked is usually at 90 degrees to the river, and you get a lot of views through the cars because it's not a continuous thing. So as you approach at the moment, you do see the river through the cars quite generously, really.
Well, I think if you are walking along the Whitesands shopping area, you're looking through 4 stacks of parked cars. So it's not as though it's 1 or 2 lines of cars. You've got 2 aisles and 4 stacks of cars. So that would coalesce into a pretty uniform barrier, I would suggest. That glimpsed views are really not on offer.
In paragraph 10.4, you respond to the objection that the proposals are too modern. But the word you use for your design is contemporary. I struggle to know precisely what the difference between modern and contemporary was. Could you explain that?
Well, I'm not saying that the design would not be modern. I'm saying that the design will be of its time. It will use traditional materials. It will respond to the context, but it's not trying to look old-fashioned. It wants to be something of its time. It's a contemporary contribution to Dumfries. And you could say the same for other projects that have happened in the town, which do not ape the past or have any pastiche or qualities that are old-fashioned. I think in the question there was someone perhaps thinking it should be old-fashioned or it should be historical. So it was responding to that, saying it wants to be neutral.
Thank you for that. You mentioned somewhere the glass and aluminium panels, and that there was no detailed drawings of these. I've been asking for these detailed drawings for something like 2 years, so I'm with you. Are you aware of anywhere in the world where there's a flood prevention scheme that involves demountable panels on top of a glass barrier? I did ask this question of Michelle, and they couldn't tell me. I've just never heard of this. Could you? Do you know of anything?
There has been discussions. I might have to defer to the technical team on this, but there has been discussions with manufacturers who can install this. I think have installed it, and I think there are projects that have demountable barriers on them. But I may have to defer to others on that one.
Thank you. So it should be possible to get some detailed drawings. You see, one of the things, what I'm particularly worried about is the scale of maybe the aluminium in relation to the glass, because it's going to have to be pretty strong. And the top balustrade strong to hold the demountable panels. So at this stage, you haven't, as the designer, haven't got those details. Is that correct?
Yes, that's seen as part of detailed design, and I think I agree it is a very important aspect that it is a non-industrial aesthetic, and it looks good and is a simple, elegant solution. Now, paragraph 10.10 and 10.11, I do want to just ask you a little bit about this. This is about the height of one of the objections is the height of the barrier is too high. Okay, and you refer to a thing called human scale. You want the barrier height to a level that is related to human scale. Now, personally, I like the sound of that. I'm very enthusiastic about that. But could you tell us what you mean by human scale? And could you tell us, is the 3 metre then, or the 2.5 metre permanent, is that the kind of maximum of human scale? You think that's about it? Is that the optimum? Or? So I think we can compare the cul-de-sac scheme, shall we call it, where we got to in 2015, where a series of iterations, increases in height along the road had led to a cross-section profile that was not related to human scale. What we then undertook was a process of re-evaluating the way in which the permanent defence is built up. And the components of that, as now developed and presented, are ones that do have human scale. And I would amplify that as follows. The mass section at the base of the defence, which has our slopes, is to a height that relates to the human eye, the standard human eye level. Therefore, it relates to human scale. On top of that, there is a glass panel. The height of the glass panel is 1.1, and that's the sort of height that you would get in or around areas commonly. It relates to human scale. So in both the base area and in the upper panel, you have the human scale introduced, and so that's part of the proposal.
Thank you for that, and I'm very satisfied with that, and tend to agree with you up to a point. If these dimensions were to be increased, perhaps for a thing like climate change in future, for instance, if the bund or the raised walkway had to be raised in future, or if the glass balustrade at 1.1 had to be raised in future, would the scheme then be going beyond human scale?
There hasn't been a design for the eventuality of changing for climate change, except to ensure that the below ground foundation works are fit for that purpose, fit for the eventuality that there may be a scenario some way down the line where we're looking at a world which is different from this one, and where we might need to take further action. So it's future-proofing has been undertaken in the costing for the concealed below raised walkway foundations. What happens above that in terms of the height of the glass panel or any other element is subject to detailed design further down the line. But what's not part of the scenario thinking is that the raised walkway would be raised in height. That would remain at 1.4 above, a maximum above the footway.
You see, I was actually trying to save the council a bit of money here, because they seem to want to spend a lot of money on strengthening the foundations, but I have not seen, and I'm looking for your guidance, perhaps, as to how this barrier could be raised in future. If you don't raise the raised walkway, if you don't raise the glass balustrade, then can it only be done by increasing the height of the demountable panels?
Mr. Dyson, sorry for interrupting. I think we perhaps addressed this already with some of the technical witnesses. I'm wondering whether it might be more appropriate if we go back a step. You were asking really about would it still be on a human scale? And I think that's probably just the question that you were seeking to be answered. Is that correct?
Yes, but I am struggling. Maybe we have to think. I'm still struggling to see how this thing gets raised in future.
I think my advice is that some of the points that you're seeking to make would be better kept to your closing submissions. But if we could perhaps put the question back to Mr. Pert, that say in the future, imagine the scenario where it had to be raised in height, would you still consider an increase to the height of the bund or the glass panels, or both, to still remain of human scale?
I don't know what the cost is for increasing the foundations to future-proof them. I imagine it's not very much, because it's all buried work at that scale. So the question of the what would change, I think the design is one that can accommodate change easily, unlike self-rising barriers, which do have a major problem. What would change? It wouldn't be the raised walkway. That would stay at that height. That's where the foundations are built to. So it would be what element is above the raised walkway that would be increased.
Okay, so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is that to future-proof the scheme, the foundations have been designed to allow the bund to stay at the height that it is just now, and any future increase would likely to be to the glass panels, and the demountables. Therefore, the bund is what you consider to be what remains at human scale. Is that what you're saying?
For future scenario thinking, yes, the bund remains at human scale, or the raised walkway remains at that level.
Okay. I don't want to get too technical, but you accept that this is designed then to a 1 in 75 flood level, yes? We mentioned climate change earlier. Am I right in, did you also say that no provision has been made for climate change in your design?
Yes, the design is up to the 1 in 75 flood return period model, and the freeboard height. That's its design level.
You may not be aware of Mr. Tim Jolly's evidence.
Sorry, I think we're straying back into technical matters which were addressed at a different session, and I don't think these are fair questions to put to this witness, Mr. Dyson. He is here to discuss visual and heritage, not technical matters, and I think, to be fair to the witness, we need to be clear on that.
Okay. I and the public of Dumfries will need to get some answers to some of these questions somehow.
We had the topic on technical matters. That topic has now gone. This is not for debate at this session. This session is quite clearly visual and heritage, and this witness is here for that purpose. And I don't think it's appropriate to ask them questions that perhaps could or should have been put to a witness at a previous session.
You mentioned the ramp might be discriminatory if it wasn't provided. I'm not going to go into that because we've had a bit of decision. I just wanted to, I don't know if you're the right person to ask this. I'll be corrected if I'm not. How will your design accommodate things like the traditional fair that comes twice a year and goes on that site?
Again, this was asked and answered at a previous session. We do still have the sessions on town centre. Perhaps there's a witness you could maybe put that to later. Okay. No, that's fine.
And I do apologise if I'm straying. I'm not, I do apologise to you, Mr. Pert, as well. I'm sorry. I'm just looking for answers to questions. So. Could I just ask you about the drawings? I know there's a lot of sections, but there was no elevations, or I couldn't find any what I call elevations, of the length of the scheme, because I was trying to identify the detail of just like where the glass panels started and finished and were in walls and not. Did I miss that, or are there elevations?
Yes, there are elevations, but I don't think they have made their way into the package. Instead, what the elevations fed into was the animation, so that one could see what the experience would be of the flood protection scheme. So that animation is based on plan, section and elevation information all coming together. So yes, there's no as yet straight elevations in the package, but that's all been fed into the wider information.
It would have been useful, just I wanted to check things like the ramps that are there, the wheelchair, just to try and make sure that the angles were DDA compliant. Can I take it they are all DDA?
We do have details around the Devergilla Bridge in elevation. In fact, in the Devergilla Bridge report, reference, whatever it is, we have full elevations of the bridge, upstream, downstream, and cross-sections of existing and proposed. And what those cross-sections show is the slopes, as I would call them, ramps have been used, the slopes that lead out from the landings and up from the esplanade. So that area of sensitivity is covered in cross-sections which show elevations behind.
Yeah, I'm coming to an end. You'll be pleased to know. All right. Just in your final conclusion, you talk about a new and more appropriate land use for the Whitesands. We may have covered this. I think we probably have. I was really just, do you, I think we've probably covered it, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you accept that this land use, in planning terms, wouldn't you normally expect that kind of change of land use to be the subject of a formal planning application?
Sorry, again, Mr Dyson, that's a question for the later stages, other topics that we've still to address, not today.
Okay. Well, all I can do then is, Mr Pert, thank you very much for being so patient.
Thank you, Mr Dyson. I think most of my questions have been already answered in their exchanges. Just one fairly minor point, just to clarify what you mean. In your recognition, you talk about the blight caused by the profile of the location in the media. Are you suggesting that there are any other physical signs of blight at that location that you consider have been taken into account as part of the scheme?
Well, I'm aware there's sessions on regeneration as part of the inquiry. So it is...
Sorry, I was just meaning in relation to the reference you made to blight in your recognition. Were you meaning something wider or just the media references?
It's the general perception that is given through the media of the Whitesands and Dumfries and the area being a location associated with flooding. Negative associations that prevent inward investment and an uplift to the area.
That's fine, thank you.
Yeah, just during the charrette process that you were involved in, were there concerns that are expressed then that are being expressed now by some of the objectors?
There were discussions with businesses down at the Whitesands. There were visits down to there. There were people who came up to the hotel. The car parking was an issue then and has remained a key issue. I would say that was that's the only one that sticks in my memory as one that traders felt that would affect the footfall past their units. Views from Bank Street were raised. So there were some issues relating to views. Mostly it was about car parking in terms of what Mr Dowson's been presenting. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mr Connell.
I have nothing further, ma'am.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll reconvene at 1:45.
Can I just check in terms of progress, just for purely practical reasons? We obviously only have the one witness left. Having heard this morning's discussion, I have very little in supplementary nature for that witness. I'm just trying to make a stab at whether the current anticipation is closed today.
Yeah, what we don't do is propose to bring forward the next topic sessions. We did have a think about it, but I think it would be a bit unfair. I think you had some witnesses that perhaps were unavailable anyway, so we will just, after this afternoon, we will close the inquiry for the week, and we'll attempt to feed that back to the public. Sometimes it's quite difficult to get the website updated quickly enough, but we'll try to ensure that people know that we won't be sitting tomorrow and Friday, and we will reconvene on Tuesday. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Connell, you're not expecting anyone else to? No. Okay. Okay. Oh. Okay, just before we start with our next witness, I just want to mention that I will take a little bit of time at the end of this session just to talk about next week and the programming. Okay, but if I want to hand over now to Mr. Connell for your next witness, please.
Thank you, ma'am. My next witness is Susan Irwin. Good afternoon. You have a summary precognition as well as a full precognition. And in the first section, as is common, your summary precognition sets out your name, details, and some of your professional background. I think we'll take that as read. So I ask you to start reading at section 2, please.
Hello. My evidence focuses on the assessment of the potential townscape and visual impacts arising from the scheme, and if necessary, the key documents to which I refer are the environmental statement and extracts of the guidelines for landscape and visual impact assessment, the 3rd edition.
I think you now move on to the actual TVIA, as we've been shortening it to.
Just before I read through all of it, there's a wee bit of comparison with 2014. Do you want me to just do the summary and then the themes arising from the 2016 scheme, just to keep things more concise?
I think for present purposes, I think if we stick to your summary, and then we'll pick up later if there are any other themes.
So the summary is section 4. So the development is a flood protection scheme that will protect Greensands, Whitesands, Dockhead, Dock Park and Welldale from flooding events up to the 1 in 75 years return period. The proposed development site lies almost entirely within the Dumfries Conservation Area and fronts onto the River Nith. The TVIA assessed the impact of the proposed development on the townscape resources and visual amenity against the baseline. That is the baseline is what's there now, and the assessments on the construction and on completion. And it considered the potential effects of the proposed development on key townscape components and views from surrounding residential properties, those working in the area, roads and public recreation areas. It considered the extent to which any loss of townscape character and the introduction of the proposed development would influence perception of and the visual enjoyment of the area. There has been a significant change to the design proposals since the first TVIA that I did in 2014. In 2015, a revised proposal was approved by Dumfries and Galloway councillors that replaced the landscape bunds with a much lower ground modelling approach, with a raised walkway of up to 1.4 metres above the foot-by height and topped by a glass balustrade onto which can be fixed the temporary demountable panels. So the 2016 assessment is based on that revised proposal.
I think in your full precognition there is a discussion of the changes from 2014 to 2016.
Yes, there are, but unless I'm asked something specific, it's probably not worth going through all that today. I thought, if you prefer, I could just discuss the themes arising from the objections to the 2015 proposals.
I think it's probably just easier if you continue reading your precognition. Yeah.
Okay, so the 2016 proposals, the significance when completed and operational. So the townscape, it was considered in the Greensands area that there would actually be minor beneficial townscape effects, and that's due to the fact that we improved the local environment and existing structures, and that the construction of the flood defence system would be in keeping with the character of the local area. And the visual receptor effects, there would only be one visual receptor would experience minor adverse effects, and that's the newspaper offices. In the Whitesands area, we concluded that there would be moderate beneficial townscape effects, and that's because despite the connection with the river being reduced from the road, there would be improved urban environment through the removal of parking, the introduction of a high-quality public realm, and improved relationships with the river from the raised walkway. The visual receptors affected particularly would be 92 and 99 Whitesands. There would be minor adverse effects. one Bank Street, minor adverse. But the national cycle route, because of it being on this new public realm, would be moderate beneficial. Bank Street, minor adverse, and Whitesands, minor beneficial. Dock Park, the conclusion was that for townscape, there would be minor beneficial effects due to the public realm improvements, which include new resurfacing, planting, and street lighting. And the visual effects, which is principally the national cycle route at this point, would be minor beneficial. Dock Park, we concluded that townscape effects would be minor adverse, but this would be at the car park entrance only, and that's because the flood wall, that would be at the park entrance only. The flood wall separates the footpath and the cycle path from the car park, but maintains the riverside walkway relationship. So visual receptor effects that would be minor adverse, Dock Park, leisure and recreational, and minor adverse for the cycle route as well, because of this bit of separation. At Welldale, the conclusion was that there would be negligible townscape effects, as there would be little intervisibility of the new flood defence scheme with the wider area, and therefore visual receptor effects would be negligible and minor adverse only.
And then I think you're going on in the next section, as you suggested, to pick up some of the themes that have emerged during objections.
Yes, that's correct. So I reviewed the 2017 and 2018 representations, and I collated these under like-type topics. So first off, there was the point being raised was the introduction of the raised walkway will remove the historic river views of the River Nith, the Devergilla Bridge, and the Col. So the answer is that, or my response is that from Welldale, from the west bank of the River Nith, there will be no loss of the river or the Col or the bridges, because there's nothing impeding any views. From Greensands, there will be no loss of the river views. In Dock Park, there will be partial loss of elements from some views at ground level by residents at Linden Grove. However, the flood barrier includes sections of glass panels along the river walkway to maintain some views through. Whitesands and Dockhead, a number of business receptors and road receptors will experience a reduction in clear views of the river. However, existing views include traffic and parked cars. The removal of the toilet block will be an improvement to views from the businesses, particularly at 1 to 4 Whitesands. Views are maintained by openings within the defence system by the bus stances at Sandy Opening and opposite Assembly Street, and views opposite Nith Place are maintained through the glazed balustrade, I think I should say Nith Street. Views from the residential receptors are in the main from upper floor levels, either due to being situated over shops, businesses, or principal rooms being on upper floors. And views will change, but there will be limited impacts as river views will remain. Pedestrians and cyclists on the new Riverside walkway will experience no loss of views and will enjoy an improved public realm environment. So point 2. The proposals will have a significant impact on the character and appearance of the riverside. The design of the raised walkway is not appropriate in an urban setting. So the proposals are predominantly urban in form, introducing attractive areas of public realm appropriate to an urban setting. The new riverside walkway design incorporates substantial areas of hard surfaces, stone-clad walls, and glazed balustrades. Soft landscape is part of the scheme, but connects visually and physically with Greensands and Dock Park and relates to the open green areas along the west bank. Third point that was raised, physical and visual separation of the town and river with views from the road blocked. The conclusion of the TVA is that there will be changes to the views of the river from Whitesands and Dockhead in particular. There will be physical separation, particularly between Buccleuch Street and Assembly Street, where the defence system includes a raised walkway. However, the sequence of openings and use of glazed screens still allows views through to the river from the road level and from the streets leading down from the town centre. From the new raised walkway, views and relationships between the town and river will be maintained. The elevated walkway will improve views of the river and across to Mill Green Park. The next point, loss of views of the town from the west side of the river. There will be negligible loss of views of the town from the west side of the river. From the west side of the river, the raised walkway and additional planted elements would screen the busy road and traffic, but views of the town centre would be maintained. The next point, natural landscape destroyed irrevocably. Whitesands and Dockhead are an urban landscape currently dominated by traffic and parking. Greensands, Welldale and Dock Park are green open spaces with significant man-made influences. The new public realm will be a positive contribution to this area of the town, offering an improved riverside experience separated from the busy traffic street. Welldale will have new tree planting which will compensate for the loss of any trees that are required to be removed. Dock Park, the formal beech hedge and ornamental street trees planted as part of the Dock Park improvements will require to be removed. Greensands, the proposals will improve the appearance of this area by incorporating a grasscrete system to the rationalised parking arrangements. New tree planting will compensate for the loss of any trees that will require to be removed. The Whitesands would become a through route and not a destination. The introduction of the flood defence system will improve the public realm and incorporate an attractive riverside and raised walkway beneficial to the local area, enhancing its potential as a destination by offering an improved riverside environment and views over the river. The next point. The flood defence proposals will change the shape of the town of Dumfries. The road corridor along Dockhead and Whitesands will be adjusted, resulting in the removal, realignment or relocation of parking spaces, footways and cycleways, but all within the existing curb alignment. So there's no change to the shape of town. New wall at Dock Park will impact on the character and appearance of the park entrance. The flood defence system will physically separate the existing car park from the park entrance and will be visible from St Michael's Bridge Road, but the proposed stone wall will be in keeping with the existing wall and entrance features. Glazed panels will enable views between the riverside footpath and the car park. Pedestrians and cyclists will be disadvantaged. Pedestrians and cyclists will experience disruption during construction as the footway cycleway will be closed or diverted, but on completion, pedestrians and cyclists will enjoy resurfaced routes and improved riverside experience, particularly along Whitesands and Dockhead, where the shared route will be separated from the road. And lastly, inclusion of flower beds are inappropriate and will not withstand flood events. At this stage of the process, there's been no detailed study of the trees and shrubs. All planting will be selected to be tolerant of inundation.
And that just, I think, leaves section 6, which are your conclusions.
Okay, so conclusions. The TVIA concludes that there would be no significant adverse townscape or visual effects. It is acknowledged that some views from Whitesands and Dockhead in particular will be affected. Views of the river by road users and pedestrians and businesses on the east side of the road will change. However, current views of the river are negatively influenced by parking and traffic. The scheme will improve the streetscape and the character of Whitesands and Dockhead through the removal of the majority of the car parking and the inclusion of new trees and the creation of an attractive raised walkway with the retained cycleway along the riverside. Views from the road and on the approach from the town centre, whilst affected, will still be visible through the glazed balustrades and openings. Pedestrians and cyclists will be able to enjoy the riverside views separated from the traffic and will enjoy enhanced views of the river from the raised walkway locations. The final design is a balance of all the technical requirements associated with a flood protection scheme. The design has evolved to mitigate any significant adverse effects and offers a coherent and consistent solution which will introduce an area of high quality public realm, enhancing the local area.
Thank you very much. Mr. Connell.
Thank you very much. Given the discussion at some length this morning, I have no supplementary questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Hello there. Hi. Just that last point where you say the design has evolved to mitigate any significant adverse effects. You probably heard me going on about mitigation. But could you describe or can you tell us what the significant adverse effects are or that you're referring to? Or?
The significant adverse effects would have been part of the design. The design approach has been one of developing the principles associated with a flood defence scheme such that where it's, and this is from a soundscape and visual perspective, where there might be greater blocking of views through a particular solution. So the design has evolved from the 2014 scheme when it first started through to the 2016, and it reduced the height of the permanent flood defence solution, included the glazing to ensure that views could be maintained as far as possible. It set back at the dock park the wall from the Riverside Walkway. So in that particular location, the mitigation was to, rather than have the the flood defence scheme separating the walkway from the river, it was set back on the other side so that you could still maintain all your views. So the mitigation has been an inherent part of the evolution of the design to actually reduce visual issues.
I mean, would it be right to summarise that then, that the main significant adverse effects are really effects on river views, in fact, and you're seeking to mitigate them in as many different ways as possible?
Yes, that is correct. And as I say, what's perhaps not come, that because of this being a summary, I did a TVIA for the early scheme in 2014, and it did raise some concerns of blocking of views. And so the design has developed from that, along with other aspects of the brief for the flood defence system. But yes, it's the scheme has gone a long way to make sure it keeps and maintains the views as far as possible. But the big issue for the views seems to be from the road, whereas the riverside views are all maintained uninfected.
If I go to your full recognition rather than the summary, I was very interested in paragraph 3.2, where you actually quote from the scoping report. I found some of the comments in there. Could I just maybe go through them with you a little bit? The first one was, the area is widely recognised to have maintained character and value. Would you agree with that as a statement of the existing situation?
Yes, overall, I would say it does.
And the next bit then said, and while the proposed bund will reduce the scale of the views in some places, so you agree with that the bund will reduce the scale of views in some places?
I think we just need to be a bit careful at breaking this sentence down. This was done at the SEA stage. It's a compulsory. Not compulsory. It's a part of the process of determining whether an EIA is needed, and you do a scoping report, and you get responses from statutory consultees on the scoping report, and then those responses determine whether you actually need to go ahead and do a full EIA. So this is a response to a very high-level principle of flood defence scheme. So we just need to get that acknowledged, that this is not commenting on the scheme that's been put forward. This is in principle. This is just saying that it was part of the process required a TVIA to be undertaken.
Okay, I understand, but you're saying that this scoping report would assume sort of what a very large. I mean, are you talking about a 1 in 200 or one? I mean, I thought our scheme was quite large at 1 in 75. Would that not apply to this?
I don't think I can't answer that question. All I can say is that I'm highlighting here that the correct process was gone through, and that the reason for the TVIA being undertaken was that at scoping stage it was acknowledged that there could potentially be effects or even significant effects, and that the TVIA would look at that and address that as required. So this is just part of the process. I think if you're asking me to break every sentence down in here, we're not going to get the answer you want, because this is too early in the...
But I appreciate that, but I'm just trying to be sure that, I mean, you have quoted this, you've put this in, I'm sure you've chosen it presumably carefully in the light of that, but I mean, for instance, the next phrase says that it could effectively disconnect the river from the lower area of Whitesands. I mean, I know I'm breaking it down, but these are all statements that are made or conclusions from that report. I'm just asking whether you agree with this paragraph you've quoted.
The paragraph I've quoted, as I say, is a result of consultation exercise at scoping. And they concluded that there could be the potential with a flood defence scheme for some disconnect, and that as a result of this statement, the TVIA is required as part of the EIA. The EIA then concluded that, yes, there was some areas of disconnect, and particularly in Whitesands, but we believe that the design that has been put forward has mitigated as far as possible the most significant adverse effects.
So you agree there are significant adverse effects, and I thought that you just said that it was mitigating the most significant adverse effects.
No, I didn't say that it concluded as significant adverse effects. I confirmed that this scoping stage indicated that there was the potential for significant adverse effects, and that a TVIA was then required to determine whether there would be any significant adverse effects. The TVIA has concluded that there will not be any significant adverse effects.
So I'm aware of that. Okay, thank you. Could I just ask a little detail point? You mentioned at various points desktop reviews. Does that mean these are done at distance and are merely desktop exercises?
A desktop review is a normal part of TVIA assessment, or LVIA is it's actually more often that we undertake, and that's where we review relevant policy documents. So that has to be done at your desktop, because it's not part of the actual site visit aspect. It's checking background studies. Some areas may be have a lot of historical documents that we worth reviewing. So that's why it's called desktop, because yes, you do actually sit at your desk and do it.
Thank you for that clarification. Right. Okay. In paragraph 410, you mentioned the 2014 design proposals, but I just want to reassure you I'm not going to ask you about them, because I think they're well confined to history. just in paragraph 412, just to help me and to help a few members of the public who've asked me about this, could you explain what a townscape receptor is? It's just some people don't understand the word receptor.
Yes, I appreciate it. It's terminology. Receptor, and there's two types of receptor, and I'll explain. Townscape receptor and visual receptor. And that's basically the townscape, which is what you've just asked me about, is you can break down a town into zones. That's maybe defined by the architecture, it could be a character of that town. And so rather than trying to do an assessment of the whole town, which could dilute your results, you break down the area within the study area into different character zones, and that gets classed as a receptor. So it's a character zone determined by the influences around it, as I say, whether the style of architecture, the density of development, the amount of open space.
Thank you for that. Okay, let's just go ahead. In paragraph 5.3, we have covered this point. It's really about you say here, the design of the flood defences maintains the views by the use of glass panels. You've probably heard I don't want to go over that again. I'm sure we've already made that point. But have you taken on board some of the points that we were trying to make about that we're not convinced that the glass panels actually do achieve what you say here, that they do actually maintain the views?
Yes, I have taken on board the points, and I acknowledge that within the TVIA that the glass panels will not give you as clear a view as you currently have at the moment. But it's about a balance of what you can achieve with the design solution. The assessment is about determining the impacts of a flood defence scheme, and there are vertical elements that you have to be incorporated as part of that. And to reduce the impacts, visual impacts and the townscape impacts, the introduction of the glass barriers maintain an intervisibility that you wouldn't have if you just had a solid wall. So yes, there are changes, there are reductions in the degree of visibility, but it doesn't block the views entirely.
Thank you. Right. In paragraph 5.7, this was about the landscape being destroyed irrevocably, and it's really just a special question about the green sands. You say here that the green sands and others are green open spaces, albeit with significant man-made influences. I mean, what's your views of the cars going into that, cars being put into that green space? Do you not think that's going to be detrimental to a green space?
Well, there's already car parking down at the green sands, and it's just a case of people finding any place that they can at the moment. So there is some formal parking areas, but there's also a lot of just parking all over the verges. So the idea, as part of the flood defence scheme, is to acknowledge that parking is desired there and rationalise it. But to compensate for the parking and to reduce the effect of the parking, the proposals include a grasscrete or reinforced grass solution, which reduces the visual impact of of open, hard landscape areas.
I mean, do you think that that kind of treatment could be used on the Whitesands, where there's car parking, that grasscrete and all sorts of techniques could be used on the Whitesands to make any car parking there more attractive and more acceptable?
I'm only hesitating because we're starting to get into a different design solution if we go down this route.
Okay. I think we should perhaps not expect this witness to answer that question, because what you're asking her really to comment on is the impact at Greensands, isn't it? In terms of...
Yes, but okay.
Okay, okay, maybe I'll rephrase that then. And what you're considering is, I suppose for this witness, it's whether or not the proposed scheme has an adverse impact on Whitesands. Is that really what you're getting at? As opposed to looking at something entirely different, which is not before us.
Probably, to help, I think it's probably better I'll leave the question, because I kind of knew the answer to it was yes. So I'm quite I'm quite happy to move on. In paragraph 5.8, this is about the Whitesands becoming a through route. You may have heard Mr. Pert talking earlier about eye views in cars. I don't know if you picked that up. Do you accept that people driving along the Whitesands in future with that kind of eye view will simply not see the river, may not even know it's there, and therefore perhaps continue to drive through?
I think we ought to be very specific here about which direction of travel we're discussing, because if you travel from the north to the south as things currently stand, the river is barely perceptible with the amount of traffic and car parking and the toilet block and the bus shelters. There's some points on the road where actually you wouldn't know there was a river there. Admittedly, it's brief because if you're in a car, you're travelling, but the point is the existing elements already block the views. But travelling north is where you do get the views of the Col and the Devergurla Bridge, but they are impacted by all the parked cars and the traffic on the Whitesands as it currently stands. Now, I've already concluded and explained that TVIA acknowledges that there will be changes to the views, but they don't block the views entirely. And I believe that the positive new public realm arrangement will actually encourage people to want to come and actually look at that and enjoy the riverside experience. So I believe it would become a destination and not just retained as a through route.
Would you accept at the moment, in a drive-through situation, as a destination, that if people do see the river and want to stop, the car park's there, but they may have much greater difficulty in future without that car parking?
I think the issue of the car parking is probably best for that session. If you're asking about the visual impacts of the car parking, then that's fine, Mr. Dowson.
Just a point in your conclusion, 6.1, the end sentence, you say, however, current views of the river are negatively influenced by parking and traffic. Do you accept that the traffic will still be there? In other words, that this scheme, I don't think, removes the traffic?
Correct. It won't move the traffic, but it will remove the car parking that's on the riverside, and I believe that that is beneficial and to the Whitesands.
Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Dawson.
Thank you.
Sorry. I think you've answered most of my questions already. If you just bear with me a second. I think it's pretty much been accepted that what you're saying is there will be some change in views and there will be some locations along the Whitesands where views will be blocked, but they won't be entirely blocked. Has there anywhere been an assessment of the proportion of the views that would be retained or blocked?
Not a proportion, but I've hoped by breaking it down into the different zones, the five key areas, that it explains where the greatest issues are, and that is along the Whitesands. But it's specific to travelling in a car on the Whitesands or walking along in front of the shops, because the views from the riverside will not be affected at all.
Thanks very much.
Just a methodological point. In your table 12.2, you set out the criteria for the magnitude of change. But that doesn't differentiate between beneficial and adverse changes. And then in table 12.4, you introduce the concept of beneficial and adverse changes. At other occasions, such as these that I've been to, I've been told by some people that there's a methodological danger in trading off adverse and beneficial impacts, because that introduces an additional value judgment, and that should be a separate step. And it's better just to decide whether it's a significant change or not, and not comment on when it's beneficial. What would be your position on that?
It is always a tricky one, and that's because, generally speaking, there's always an assumption that if you're introducing a new element into the landscape or townscape, it's going to be adverse. So the guidelines do tend to sort of lead you towards the assumption that it's going to be adverse. And the guidelines also advise us to concentrate on where there's likely to be significant adverse effects. But I don't think you can just stop and say whether it's significant, because then nobody knows what that actually means. You have to clarify whether that's an adverse or a beneficial effect, so that you can decide whether the scheme should progress or whether you do need additional mitigation over and above any inherent design compensation that's taken place as part of the process. So I don't think you could just leave it as saying significant, because you wouldn't know what the significance was.
Oops, thanks very much. Mr. Connell, would you have any final points for your witness?
I have nothing further, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Ms. Irwin. Okay. Just having a thought about next week. We've estimated that we would commence the session on the impacts on town centre, tourism and parking on Tuesday morning, with Mr Dowson from Whitesands has been the only witness that morning. Given the progress that we've been making, we're thinking that there might be scope for more than one witness that morning, and that there would be the prospect of the council witnesses being brought forward from at least one of the council witnesses being brought forward from the afternoon session to the morning, with the same considerations the following day, that the bringing forward the witnesses for the council would then potentially shift forward Morag, MacDonald, Mr Dowson and Mr Coulter on the subject of community engagement from the Wednesday afternoon to the Wednesday morning. Can I just ask the parties in turn if they have any thoughts on that? Dowson first.
I just wanted to pick it up correctly. You said that, I'm thinking in terms of community engagement, we have Mr Coulter, I think, coming to that. When would you want him here?
So instead of Wednesday afternoon, it potentially be Wednesday morning?
Wednesday
next
morning.
Week?
Yeah, I think that will be all right.
And that Morag MacDonald too? Morag MacDonald too?
Is Morag, just clarification, is Morag appearing in her own right or as part of our group? I'm not quite clear on that.
She is appearing on her own right, but we weren't sure whether or not she was someone that you were directly in contact with.
I can get in contact with her, but I'll have to do that and ask her. So you want them both here when on Wednesday?
It would be beneficial if both the parties were available on Wednesday morning, or at the very least Mr Coulter.
Right. Certainly in principle, I'm happy to try for that. I'll just have to check with both of them.
That's accepted. Mr Connell, would the council witnesses be available to take up one of the potential slots on Tuesday morning next week?
We will formally check, but the anticipation is that the council witnesses should have some flex unless there's some particular problem we're not aware of, and that would apply later in the programme as well if we can identify what might be needed.
Yeah, I think that the same situation might happen towards the Thursday too, with Mr Sayers and Mr Smith being estimated to come on in the Thursday afternoon, if they could be available to be flexible and potentially sit in the Thursday morning if that's required.
We'll, once we have the benefit of the adjournment, we'll obviously make formal inquiries, but the hope is that all of these witnesses can have enough flexibility to slot in a little earlier than might in theory have been planned.
To avoid dead time, so that we finish like this time on Tuesday, and then we've got to sort of tread water. Because someone else thinks it's going to be a Wednesday. I'm sure everyone can understand that. So if we could just ask the parties just to be ready to be flexible, and it's looking like it's more likely that we're going to have to bring things forward than a less desirable outcome, as if we were having to keep you till 7 at night to keep things ticking over.
The final week's less likely to be subject to variation, because on the final week, on the 4th of December, we have Mr Fairmont, he has that allocated slot that won't be altered, and Mr John White also has an allocated slot that won't be altered on the Wednesday the 5th. So what we'll do that week, we've got our site inspection slotted around that, and we'll be able to hopefully confirm the position on the site inspections next week. So, okay, we'll agree to commence again next Tuesday on the town centre tourism and parking session. Just one final point. If we're finishing early today, we're hoping that the public deposit documents can be removed tonight, because we don't have anywhere at the hotel to store them. So it's a lot of bother to bring them along when no one has been using them. So what we're hoping is that perhaps the council could arrange for them to be taken back to either the council offices or the public library. Would that be okay, Mr Connell?
That's been relayed to us, ma'am, and we'll make arrangements for that. I think the suggestion perhaps was, given the way that they've not been used, we wouldn't bring them back again next week, and if there's some issue arises, we can deal with it later.
Yeah, that would be the case, if unless anyone feels extremely strongly about it. But all of the information is available on the DPA website, should anyone need to view any of the documents. And finally, I will attempt to get word back to the office, just so that people know that we won't be sitting tomorrow and Friday. We'll do our very best to get the website updated, but if there's any chance that you can let anyone you know who might be thinking of coming along tomorrow, that we won't be here. Okay, and can I just thank everyone for their time and their participation today, and wish you all a good weekend. Thank you.